June 28, 2023. Welcome this morning, and we have a single item on our agenda this morning. And then Ms. McGraxy, will you introduce your panel on the agenda?
Yes, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. Pleased to have Patience Whittingham and some community and state partners here to talk about emergency preparedness and response. So I'll turn it over to Patience to do introductions and walk through the various conversations we're going to have this morning.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. Chair Forrest, so for the record, again, Patience Whittingham, Lane County Emergency Manager, and we'll have a pretty robust agenda today. And the agenda will start with fire outlooks for 2023 season. I'll turn it over to our partners from fire, from ODF to OSFM, and of the local fire defense board chair fill-in position. And they'll provide some background on the outlook for the season, but also their capacities and the processes when we ask them for resources and request them for fire suppression, both in the wildland urban interface for vegetation fires, but also structured fire. Then after that, we'll try to hit that mark around 10:30, Chair, and take a 5-minute break. And then we'll move into my portion, and that's the review of the emergency operations plan, what it looks like when we declare an emergency, what the role of an elected official is, how that relates to our emergency operations plan, and where you can find that information. I'll try to speed through that pretty quickly. You will see a slide deck portion in there for County Council who's not able to be here today. So I'll run through those and very briefly, and we'll cover those at another session later on in the season. And then we'll close out around 11 o'clock with a natural hazard mitigation plan update. We'll be coming to the board in late October to ask you to formally adopt the mitigation plan. But I'd like to give you some time to review the 350 page document before I actually come and ask you to formally adopt that document. So we'll give you a little overview of what that is, what it does for us, and why we have it here at the county level. So with that,
Patience, from Metro TV, can we ask the gentleman to introduce himself?
Yes.
You were probably going to do that.
That's exactly what was going to happen.
And certainly, if you'd like, there's plenty of room at the table. The speakers are right up here, so we can all hear you very clearly.
Yep. So,
and get a much clearer shot of your faces.
So Ol will be our first presenter. Yep. So I'll let Ol sit here. No switch.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Ola Book. Pronounced Book, not Buck. Right? It's unusual for me to say that because I haven't met many folks that have the same spelling as my last name. So, but mine is pronounced Book. Different than that much normal here in this room, right? Pleasure to meet y'all. Happy to be here. I serve as the district forester in the Western Lake District of the Oregon Department of Forestry. And looking forward to meeting everyone and answering some questions today. So I do have a slide here after introductions. You want me to go ahead and get started on that? Okay.
So maybe we'll go around the room as we do have 3 new commissioners on the board since we did this last time.
Sure. Good morning, board. My name is Brent Griffiths. I'm with the Office of State Fire Marshal. As of July 1, we will actually be our own office. We were part of the Oregon State Police. As of July 1, we're now the Department of State Fire Marshal. So we'll have to get used to that distinction here. I'm assigned to Lane County as the Regional Mobilization Coordinator. It's a long title for liaison, the point of contact for the local fire service. If they have an incident that exceeds their local capacity, I can fill that role of being able to try to facilitate bringing resources. Good to be here for engaging.
Good morning, board. My name is Stephen Wallace. I'm the fire chief for Mohawk Fire, and I'm also the alternate for the fire defense board chief. To make it today. We're just here to answer your questions, and I hope you understand how the county is prepared to respond to this.
I'm Ryan Seneca, West Lane County Commissioner.
Lane County Commissioner for District 5. It's nice to see you in good times. Hopefully we can do this more often than when I normally get to see you.
I'm Matt Farr, which is I represent Bethel, Salvador, and Fremont.
Lauren Trigger, Commissioner of District 3. David Lovell, County Commissioner, District 2, Springfield.
Steve McGraxy, I'm the county administrator in Lincoln.
Let me start. Yeah. Thank you. So I mentioned on the district forester, the Western Wind District, the ODF, a quick frame up of how ODF is set up geographically. We have 3 operating areas. We're currently in the Southern Oregon area. We also have the Northwest Oregon area, which is north of here and west of the Cascades, and the Eastern Oregon operating area, which is east of the Cascades. Inside the Southern Oregon area, we have 3 Oregon Department of Forestry districts and 2 active protective associations. The 2 ODF districts that are in Lane County are the South Cascades District, which you may have worked with some of the folks there. Chris Klein is my counterpart in that district. And then the Western Lane District, which is where I'm district forester. Chris Klein was hoping to be here today, but he's actually taking an assignment to go help our neighbors in Canada. So he'll be up there for about 2 weeks. On the district that I manage, Western Lane, we provide 3 primary services. Protection of fire, which we'll talk about in detail today. And we do that work in mostly Western Lane County, west of roughly I-5, and northwestern Douglas County, primarily the Smith River drainage. So we provide wildfire protection in that area. The other services we provide is state forest management. Commissioner Lovell, we've had a chance to discuss that in the past. And we do that work in Lane County, Douglas County, Coos County, Curry County, Jackson County, and Josephine County. And that's about 55,000 acres that we manage. And then the final piece that we do primarily is Forest Practice Act administration. And we do that work in the same footprint that we do wildfire protection, but then also in Western Douglas County, Coos County, and Curry County. So different services there. I think it's important to mention that because we're talking about wildfire today, but the folks that are assigned to that other workload also participate in wildfire. So they're part of our complete and coordinated system. So talking today, and is this set up to go ahead? I just the arrows? Okay. There we go. So I mentioned Chris Klein. He'd hoped to be here. The district that Chris manages is the South Cascade District. It covers the eastern portions of Lane County up to the Cascade Crest, and then all of Lynn County. And so he borders the Willamette National Forest. As we all know, significant lightning passes through that area. So his district deals with quite a bit more fire than what the Western Lane District. And that's fortunate for me, not so fortunate for him. So what I'm going to do today is go through kind of the current conditions and the outlook of fire season, and then give a few examples of recent fires that we've been experiencing, and then provide just a quick narrative of some of the things we're doing about it. So some of the prevention work we're doing, some of the protection work we're doing, and then how we're set up to suppress those fires. Have it set up informal. If there's any questions anytime, just go ahead and let me know. Of course, there'll be opportunity for questions at the end as well. So talking about the snow water equivalent, right? The amount of snow that we had this year was considered a pretty good snow year, right? And I think what that may have done is given a little bit of false sense of security for some folks. The snow doesn't help the lower elevations as much as the higher elevations, right? And so it really benefits higher elevations. Did have a fair amount of snow in the higher elevations. The slide shows May of 2022 and the snow water equivalent as of the middle of June. You can see the Willamette Basin there. It's about 100%. It's tough to see with our Zoom items over there, but behind the Zoom items, there is a May of 2022. What that shows is 150% just 1 month ago. So that snow is disappearing pretty quick. And I think we know why. That hot weather turned on, what, the second week of May, I believe. And we really haven't had much cold weather since then, maybe one little shot of snow here or there, a little bit of rain. So that snow water equivalent has reduced by 50% in 1 month. And it really doesn't help the lower elevations a whole lot, especially the coast range. So haven't got all the benefits from it in the area that we protect. Most of that higher elevation is Forest Service, not the ground that we have this responsibility to protect. So again, kind of created a false sense of security for, I think, some members of the public. And we're seeing that in some increased number of fires that we've had in the Bay. So moving on to a drought status. So this is the entire state, obviously. You can see Lane County there on the west part of the state and center of the state. And the blue line there is the Willamette River to give you a little bit of point of reference. So you can see there that as of June 13th, we're calling Western Lane County, the portion that Western Lane District provides wildfire protection on, is classified as abnormally dry. The remainder of Lane County is classified as a moderate drought. So that is interesting to compare, I believe, to the next one.
Excuse me, can I ask around, can anybody see the screen well enough? I think we can dim the lights a little bit. Would that interfere with your presentation?
No, it would not. It'll probably help because it is a little bit tougher to see. Yeah.
Is that better? And is that okay for Metro? Pardon my interruption, please.
No problem. So it's covered by the, is it possible to move the,
I don't know.
yeah, I won't mess with that. It's like,
I'll ask somebody right now.
yeah, so it's okay. The moral of the story is we're more dry this year than we were last year at this time, which makes sense. Last year we had a really dry winter, but a wet spring. This year we had a wetter winter, but a dry spring. So it makes sense that we'll be more dry this year. Another key thing that I think I would consider good news, in that lower right-hand corner, you can see portion of the June 2022. See that big bullseye, a very high drought area, that's Central Oregon. They were in much worse condition last year than they are this year. So I consider that some good news. We'll talk about it more in a bit, but that does affect our ability to protect Lane County, because if there's a lot of fires outside of Lane County, it takes up a lot of resources that we might want to have available here. So even if we are looking in a reasonable condition, if there's a lot of fires on the landscape throughout the region, that does adversely affect us in the availability of resources, and then sometimes the availability to detect fires if the whole area is covered in smoke. We'll talk about that more in a bit. So moving on to the seasonal drought outlook. This is a slide that's put together by a predictive services unit out of Boise, and it gives us an idea on what we're looking at for drought through this summer season. So they're in our portion of Oregon, you can see that it shows that they expect drought to persist. So we're not expecting it to really improve, which isn't a big surprise. So we don't normally get a lot of rain during the summer months. But for the remainder of this fire season, we would expect drought to persist. So moving on to the seasonal temperature precip. And I know there's a lot going on here, but I wanted to add a couple extra slides here for comparison between two different forecast periods. So focus your attention on that left-hand slide and notice the difference between the top left slide and the bottom left slide. The top left, it's kind of tough to see. That's a forecast that was done on June 15th of this year to cover July, August, and September. The bottom left slide was a forecast that was done in the middle of May of this year for June, July, and August. And the difference there that I want to call out is that their forecast calls for hotter temperatures than what they thought even a month ago. So they're expecting temperatures to be above average, is what that's saying, for the remainder of this fire season. So expecting warmer temperatures, which will have an effect on our fuels. On the lower right-hand side, there's two slides, and that discusses expected precipitation. The moral of the story there is these slides were prepared at the same time, covers the same amount of time period, but it's saying that we're expecting below average rain. Does that mean a whole lot? Maybe not, because we don't get a whole lot of rain this time of year anyhow, but we are expecting less than we normally would get there this time of year. So that sets up a condition where the fuels can cure a little bit quicker than normal. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. So moving on to a monthly temperature and precipitation outlook. Same setup as far as slides for comparison purposes. On the left, you have the July forecast on the top and the June forecast on the bottom. So we're at the tail end of June, obviously, and you can see what they forecasted for June as of May 31st on the bottom, and then what we forecasted for July in the upper left-hand side, showing most of Lane County as leaning below. I'm sorry, leaning below leaning above the average temperature. So that's what we're expecting. Sorry, pardon the mistake there, but we're expecting higher temperatures, and this shows that for the month of July. For precip, similar scenario. It's showing equal chances of our normal rain, so that means not expecting any rain. So again, conditions are set up for the fuels to cure quicker than normal. So this slide here shows some forecasting of what our significant fire potential outlook is. And it's going to have three or four different slides. So we'll show June, July, August, and September. So this shows June and what we expected the potential for significant wildland fires would look like in June for the entire country. Lane County, it shows it as normal. And that's what we're seeing roughly. We didn't have any significantly large fires in June. So that is good news. Moving into July, you can see the big change there. Going back and forth real quick. June, July, you can see most of Washington just got included. It's a significant fire outlook, but then also portions of Oregon, especially southeast Oregon. So how does that affect us? Again, if there were significant fires there, smoke in the community for community health and detection, and availability of resources if there was a large fire in those areas. Moving on to August, it's basically the same. Expect or forecasted to have the normal amount of risk for significant wildland fire. September, you start seeing some locations come off the map. Typically that happens on the east side because September we have shorter days and those lighter fuels can respond to the humidity recovery in the evening. We don't get that benefit as much here because that's when we get our east winds and we don't experience that. So the risk still is about the same for us. So moving on to some of our local fuels and how we measure fuels. So we use, for the most part, we use two different fuel indices, energy release component and 1,000-hour fuel moisture. Energy release component, to put it simply, is it's a measurement of how much energy can be released in a given area of a wildfire. Moral of the story, the higher the number, the higher the risk. So if you look at this graph here, there's a couple of interesting things going on. This focuses on just the Western Lane District, and I'll show an equivalent slide for South Cascades, but you'll see a similar trend. The red line, I'm not sure if there's a pointer on here. There is. There is? There we go. So see this red line? That's this year's energy release component numbers. I printed this slide out and provided the patients about a week ago. So this is week-old data. The blue line is last year, so we can easily compare to last year. The black line is the historical average mean. And you can see date along the bottom and the ERC number along the left. These thresholds here are roughly what we use to help us determine if the risk is moderate, high, or very high or extreme. What's really interesting here is look at this. About May 10th, the ERCs really started climbing up to a point we were almost flirting with extreme in early to mid-May. That's not common. That was that 90+ degree weather that we had at that time. And we really have had very little rain since then. I think in Western Lane County, the Coast Range, we only measured about 1/10 of an inch in that last event. The Cascades got about 1/2 of an inch. And you can see the effect of that rain that we had a few weekends ago right there. That's what that dip in the ERC is. It's that little bit of rain. So look at last year, how low we were. We went in the fire last year, I think on July 6th. So all the way out right about here, you can see start climbing. That's when we went into fire season last year. So we went in the fire season with the ERCs in the low to mid 20s. We were already there and really haven't got below there since May 10th of this year. So pretty interesting trend for us to see. And we're seeing that effect in the amount of fires, right? We're seeing some more fires out there. So if I were to fast forward to, or shift over to South Cascades, you'd see a pretty similar trend, right? Though they've actually had a little bit more rain than the Coast Range, which is not common. See that really climbed this year, same date, and then really dropped when we had a little bit of rain and then started climbing again. When I checked this morning, both South Cascades and Western Lane, we're probably right around in the high 20s to low 30s, right in this range as of today, as of this morning. So very similar trend. There's our historical average mean. We've been above that since May until we had that little shot of rain and we're starting to climb again. So the ERCs are higher than they've historically been. And we were in fire season-like conditions in around early to mid-May. So now talking about our 1,000-hour fuels, those are, that's dead fuel that's about 3 to 8 inches in diameter. And that's the fuel size that we use to help forecast what would carry a fire, what would run the fire. So we really use that size to help determine what the risk of fire would be. So similar trend, but the difference here is 1,000-hour fuels, the risk gets higher as the number gets lower. So it's almost the reverse of the graph that we saw before. So as you get less moisture in the fuel, the more acceptable it is to burn, the harder it is to suppress a fire if it's in that fuel. So you can see a very similar trend here. This is for Western Lane. In early May, 1,000-hour fuels dropped really quick. We got a little bit less wind, a little less heat, climbed a little bit, and it's kind of hovered in this area, much below the historical average mean since mid-May. So a very similar trend. And you can, again, compare to 2022, the moistures were much higher in those fuel types, and they didn't drop until we had that little hot spell in June. We had more rain. I think it rained on 4th of July last year, didn't it? You can see that effect from the 4th of July, and then it started getting hot after that. We went in the fire season right about here last year, and you can see where the numbers are compared to last year's fire season. Same graph for the South Cascades District. Similar trend, right? So again, these are the two most common indices we use for making decisions on fire risk when we're setting restrictions on.
We have a question from Commissioner Soniga.
Okay.
I was just curious looking at these graphs and thinking of weather. Rain last year, 2 years ago, was 111 and 113 this week. What does a sharp increase like that do to the, I mean, is it temperature to graph? I mean, is it almost an equation? Or?
Yeah. So heat and wind will affect it the most to dry out the fuels. So when you get a hot, dry spell, you'll see the 1,000-hour fuels drop, and you really see the energy release component, ERC, climb fast. 1,000 hours shouldn't be changed quite as fast as other fuels. So we have a 10-hour fuel type and a 1-hour fuel type. That's just a smaller, lighter fuel. You'll see those change significantly, even with humidity changes. The heat, the wind, and the amount of humidity really increases that ERC, or changes the fuel so the ERC goes up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think you guys would agree, relative humidity and wind probably have a bigger factor than heat. Heat can cure fuels, but the relative humidity and wind can fuel fire more than destroy. At times, I feel like the heat has a bigger adverse effect on our staff, on their ability to be productive out there. You can imagine fighting fire at 100+ temperatures and suffer for them to be productive. So moving on, let's talk about some of the fires we've had since May. This fire here is a picture, I think it was about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night at our 7K fire. That fire occurred in Western Lane County, southwest of Bonita, in an area where there really is no structures or infrastructure. So it was good in that way, in that there weren't evacuations needed, and patients and I had a chance to chat about that. So it didn't affect where people live or work or where people live a whole lot, but it did affect some timber landowners. So that was primarily on Rosebrook Forest Products and Bureau of Land Management. Pretty unique. That fire started on Friday afternoon of Memorial Day weekend. And you probably recall Memorial Day weekend had a beautiful forecast, right? And so getting resources that time of year going into the holiday weekend isn't as easy as it might be after you go into fire season. But we were successful and able to get our resources. That fire ended up being about 350 acres. It aligned very well with local winds, with some terrain and some receptive fuels. And it grew to that 350 acres in less than 24 hours. For that to happen on May 26th is pretty rare for us. But we were able to be pretty aggressive on it. We got about 350 people eventually assigned to that fire. We used 6 helicopters that came in from across the state. We had helicopters come from Baker County, from McMinnville, from Medford, and then some local helicopters as well. We had crews come from all across the state too. We had engines from as far away as well. So there were a lot of folks ready to answer the call on Friday afternoon before Memorial Day weekend, which I really appreciated. One of those folks that answered the call was patients and some of your staff. When we call those crews in, we need a place to sleep them and host them. Normally, schools, pretty common, or an open field. But the fields hadn't been cut yet. The schools were still in session. And one of the hardest times, and you guys can attest to this, when we bring in a bunch of folks for operations to fight a fire, the operations part, we have a lot of resources for that. Supporting them is the challenge. Providing the logistical support is a big challenge. And that Friday night, I was concerned. How are we going to provide support to all these crews that are showing up so dark 30 the next day? One call to patients, and that made it pretty easy. You put me in touch with the right folks. I can put my folks in touch with the right folks. And Lane County Peninsula Park made available for us to host the crew. So really appreciate that. And that coordination and easy phone call just made that so much better and allowed us to focus some of our work elsewhere. So we were able to get the support we need. So thank you for that. Really do appreciate it. We also received quite a bit of help from our partners at Oregon State Fire Marshal. They stand ready to help us anytime we need it and vice versa. And there were no structures there, so not as much help needed, but they stand ready to help us anytime. So fire was very unique that early in the season. We ended up being assigned to that fire for a little over a week before the landowner was able to take it over and get it into a patrol status. And really learned a lot of lessons there. Getting all the resources in place that early in the season is difficult, but we were able to pull it off. I'm very proud of it. So moving on to another fire example, we had the Reuben Lay fire. Am I pronouncing that right? Britt Lay. So this was in South Cascades. That's why I don't know it very well. So Chris would be able to tell the story much better than me. So this fire grew to, I think, just shy of 50 acres, if I remember right. Pretty unique fire behavior for that time of year. I think that was May 29th, 30th. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So pretty early. I picked this picture for a couple of reasons. One, obviously it shows the fire, but the other reason is that this was actually taken with a drone that the South Cascades District purchased with some strategic investment money. So they can use that drone to get real-time imagery, but they can also use it because it has an IR camera to find heat. It's hard to see with this lighting, but there's little red dots on that screen. They flew this obviously after the fire is controlled, but there's still heat there. They can fly a fire and find heat to go send crews into each one of those spots, dig that heat up and put it out so that the risk isn't there as we enter into the driest part of the year. So we use that same resource on our 7K fire, and it's becoming pretty handy. And I see practical uses for that resource as well. So this fire did have homes all around it, right? Steve, were you assigned this one? Yeah. So there was a number of local fire departments on scene as well, and lots of coordination and work. I personally wasn't there, so I can't say a lot of the details, but I know there was significant interaction with our partners at OSF and our departments. And that's key, very key to our success, especially as well river interface. We really count on each other, and it's been working really well. An example of that, about a week prior to this, I believe, there was a smaller fire across from the mill in Springfield, up on this, I forget the name of the hill there. Do you remember, Steve?
Potato Hill.
Potato Hill. A fire up there. I think it got to about 5 acres, if I remember right. We were able to loan a helicopter from our fire at 7K. When I say our, at Western Lake Fire at 7K, we're able to loan a helicopter to go help on that fire. And that's an important process in place to be able to share resources. And that we've always been able to do that, but it's become much more streamlined over the last year or two. I think a lot of that thanks to you, right? Steve, you've helped develop the process to make that easier to share resources. So we have an agreement in place to share air resources in our local area here. We did about 3 years ago on the fire, the mill fire. No iron, yeah. We definitely did on this fire. We gave an example. I worked with Chief Borland on a helicopter in the past, so we've done it here locally. Last year, or I say 2 years ago, there were, I don't know, it was last year, there was the South Hills of Salem. There were some air resources that were shared between the agencies and also up in the Pag Lake area. So a lot of different aviation and other types of resources we can share, and the framework's in place to do that. It's been working pretty well. So we've heard about some of the risks and the field conditions. We talked about existing fires. What are we doing about it? One of the things we did, worked with Chief Minter to halt the backyard burning season. We did that as early as June 2nd, much earlier than normal. We were doing that because a large number of our fires were escape backyard burns. During the month of May, it was pretty common. We were rolling on fires very often. And it was a significant workload for us compared to previous years. So worked with Chief Minter to halt backyard burning on June 2nd. And then shortly thereafter, we declared fire season. You can see South Cascades went in on June 5th and Western Lane went in on June 9th. Again, for comparison, last year, we went in on July 6th. An average year, if we look at the last 20 years, I would say it's probably the last week of June, maybe just before 4th of July is when we normally do the fire season. So about a month earlier than that. Some of the other things we've been able to do is we bring on our seasonal workforce. We don't have the option to bring them all on because a lot of them are actually college students. And so they're not out of college till mid to late June. But the folks that are available, we were able to bring them on and have them available to help with firefighting. We've also had some recent legislation, Senate Bill 762 in the 2021 session gave us some additional funding to cover shoulder season. So we can hire more firefighters during the shoulder season, and that's really some benefit from that legislation. One of the other things that we've been doing, and maybe you've seen it if you've been watching KEZI, we've got a PSA campaign for prevention messaging. And that reaches about, I believe, 127,000 households in Lake County, about 500,000 people in the whole people market. So we've been able to push that out there and really help with prevention messaging. We started that earlier. We were able to do that with grants from the people organization. About $30,000 was given to both Chris and I to put this message out. And so we plan on running that all the way through fire season. One of the other things that we've done is we have an annual prevention training with local operators. We call it our operator dinner, and we use the Lane Event Centers to do that. And so part of that message is to focus on prevention of operators that are working in the business. And so we help train them at that dinner and at other venues, and we've been able to train Western Lane alone over 100 local operators to help in the firefighting effort. That's really important because our operators and landowners in our complete coordinated system for wildland fire in Oregon, they are part of the story. If you all recall Holiday Farm, the operator community there helped us contain that fire. Other states don't have as much access. Other jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions don't have access to the landowner operator community like we do in Oregon. So it really helps us. A good example of that is the Sweet Creek fire. That fire started about a week before the 2020 Labor Day fires. We officially had that contained and in control status on Labor Day at 5 p.m. that afternoon. But we know what happened that night. If we didn't have the landowner and operator community, that fire would not have been contained by that date. And it's scary to think about, well, what would have happened if that fire wasn't contained so quick? It lines almost due east of Florence and Dune City in those communities. That fire could have had a potential to run down the Situs-Long River corridor. But we were able to keep that contained at an earlier time because of that complete coordinated system that includes our landowner operator community. So this operating dinner is with many of that community, and we go over prevention missions with them, how they can play a role in preventing, detecting, and suppressing fires. The other thing we do is we actually host training so that those operators can meet the basic requirements of OSHA for fighting fire in the wildland landscape. So we, each district hosts operators, and we put them through the training so they are actually eligible to do this work and meet the standards to do it safely. Western Lane alone has done about 100 of those folks, at least 100, and I know the other districts have done 100 to us as well. So then the final piece there, and I know I'll forget all the folks we coordinate with, but we coordinate a lot with our partners at OSFN and fire structural fire departments. Interact with my local folks almost daily, and my staff does. And I know Chris Klein's staff does as well. We interact with the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service on a regular basis. Interact with our neighbors often. So our neighboring wildland fire districts almost daily on what resources they have available, what can they bring to the table if anyone wants to break a fire. So lots of coordination, and we started that sooner than normal to make sure we're all prepared and positioned to attack the fire that happens. So one of the things that's unique to Oregon as well is our smoke detection camera network. We have, you can see here, 86 cameras currently active. That number has increased in the last 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if it doubled in the last 5 years. Part of that's because of the Senate Bill 762 legislation and some other funding opportunities to increase our network. The green dots there are the active cameras. The blue ones are planned cameras. So we're still building up that network. Roughly what they are is they are a camera version of a lookout. So they're a camera up on usually a radio or a communication tower on a hilltop, and it's doing 360-degree turn, watching for fires.
Question?
Do those use cell tower, or what is the technology that keeps those cameras activated?
It varies based on site. Some of it, there's hard lines going up there, landlines going up there. We can transfer data and power that way. Other ones power solar or generator, and it's transferred via the signals in the hard line. So it varies by location. We have detection camera centers in Roseburg and in Medford, and they have paid staff that watch these cameras for silent fire. There was an example, I believe it was earlier this year, out of South Cascade. It was a brand new camera. I forget the name of the camera. It's not my district, so I don't have it memorized. Brand new camera, and it detected a fire out in an area where there's no people, far away. And we're able to detect that fire early and get people on it early. And if it wasn't for that camera, that fire could burn all night and the next day before someone saw it. So that fire alone paid for that camera and probably a number of other ones. Very effective tool for us. And you can see a comment here. It's now available for viewing in SOFSA. That's software that partners here are familiar with. It's the State of Oregon Fire Situation Analyst, I believe that's it for. So it's a software that OSFM and ODF uses to view fire data, whether it's wildland or structural. Has a lot of different information in there. That software now includes this camera network, and any of our firefighting partners across the state have access to viewing that camera. One plug that I want to put in there, one of the 3 cameras that we have in Western Lane District is on a Lane County Sheriff's Office tower. And they've been spectacular to work with. Very good partner in allowing us access to the tower, or working through the agreements needed for us to put a camera, and that's at 1 per week. So the sheriff's office, the local sheriff's office, has been a spectacular partner, really supportive of what we're trying to do there. And I appreciate that. So moving on, I wanted to do a little bit of a plug here in our statewide coordination. I think this is important in Lane County because these are resources that we have access here in Lane County if we have a fire. I mentioned that a little bit on the 7K fire. We were able to get resources from all over, and this touches on some of the resources we have available. It doesn't touch on what OSFM can bring to the table, which probably more than doubles than what we see here. So it talks about incident resource agreements. Those are the agreements that we have with that operating community. So this gives some numbers on the different resources that we have available statewide to help us on the wildland fire effort. So again, these are private resources that are operators that work out in the woods, that know their equipment, and know how to operate there. So you can see some examples: dozers, excavators, water tenders, engines, feller bunchers, a lot of different equipment that helps us fight fire. And you can see the number of folks that we have there. Also have the hand crews. When you see that the bold words up there, type 2 hand crews, 413 of them. Hand crews are a key part of our wildland fire effort. They are the ones that go in there now to mop the fire and put it out. Quite frankly, in my opinion, the aircraft we use knocks the fire down so the hand crews can get in there. The dozers put a line in so the hand crews can get in there. Almost every resource we have there so the hand crews can get in there. And so having the hand crews available is very important. So that you can see the number that we have under contract there. On the right-hand side, you can see we have 3 incident management teams. So that's the teams that we use to manage our large fires. So ODF has 3, and I believe OSFN has 3 as well. Yep. Aviation, we're going to talk about that in a bit. We have a number of aviation resources that are strategically placed around the state. And I have a map that I'll show that in a moment. And then you can see the landowner resources provided in the lower right-hand side and the resources of the 12 different ODF districts, all the different engines that we have access to if we have a local fire. So those are just additional examples of what we call our complete coordinated system. So here's that aviation resource map that I mentioned. You can see Eugene right here. This is the Western Lane District I referred to and the South Cascades District that I referred to. And you can see the different aviation resource types. So this green helicopter, that's a Type 2 helicopter that Western Lane and South Cascades Districts contracts out with Weyerhaeuser. And it's an exclusive use contract that we have for 60 days during fire season for us to use between our 2 districts here in Lane County. So you can see where the helicopters are stationed around the state, and you can see the fixed wing assets. So 2 examples right here I want to call out. These are called single engine air attack platform or air tanker platforms. 2 of those are now going to be in Roseburg. Those are important new assets that we're trying because they can get to a fire very fast and they can get retardant on fire very fast. We're going to put 2 of those in Roseburg, and it's going to be available for us to use here in this county or anywhere in the region.
All of that's 2 new ones, not a redeployment of 2 existing. Correct.
We added to the network of resources. And so we have used them before. You guys have probably worked with them. They've been used in Southern Oregon. They're effective. Our fire managers have used them quite a bit, and they find them a very effective tool, and that's why we're adding it to our complementary resources.
Question from Commissioner Bob?
On the fire retardant, we now know that there are certain areas where that is not allowed as an asset or response. Well, mainly fire quality purposes. And so our alternative often is water drop, right? So are those amongst these fixed assets on the screen also, or how do we know where those are located at any given point in time?
Yeah. So the water drop typically happens with the helicopters. You can use retardant with helicopters, but more common we use water with helicopters. Retardant's used with the fixed wing aircraft, and then we move them around. So the blue colored assets on the screen are part of our statewide severity program, and those are relocated based on risk. So there's a strategic decision made on where is the highest risk, and we move those around to address that risk. So that's a common thing that we'll coordinate with each other. What aircraft is available where, and do we need to move anything around? So pretty common move for us. In regards to the use of retardant near water, that is a concern. And it's something we train our folks on. Where's the appropriate use for that resource? So the incident commander or the fire managers that are on site during a fire, they make those tactical decisions. They know, is this the right place to use that resource? If the answer is yes, we order. And then they'll usually have a process. We'll also order what's called an air attack platform, where they're actually doing air traffic control, if you will, from higher up, where they're guiding the helicopters and the fixed wing aircraft that are fighting the fires to make sure they're doing it in a safe way.
Is this a map that the public gets to see?
Yeah.
As you move?
Not as we move it. We don't update the map every time we move a resource around. So this is where we station them at the beginning of the season, and then the blue ones we can move around. The green ones are what we refer to as inclusive use. So I use the Weyerhaeuser helicopter as an example that we have a contract with. That is entirely under the control of Western Lane and South Cascades. There are some unique examples where they can go fight fire at Weyerhaeuser, but that's under our control. So the idea there is it stays in our county. We can do a land lease to other folks, which we have done. That helicopter last year, it went and helped on some fires down in Douglas County. It has went and helped our federal partners out at times as well. So we can lend lease to those. But we don't update this map, or we are not aware of us updating this map every time we do resource growth.
Are those pilots state employees or are they private?
They're all contracted out.
What's the one that looks like a jet there? I've never seen that.
Let's see where, up in Medford.
Yeah.
Oh, that's our large air tanker. I forget the platform. You guys remember what
It's
type?
like DC-10.
I think it's DC-10. So that's the one.
The seats are like, think of it as a crop duster, the single engine air attack. That's what I would.
Oh, okay.
The bigger planes are like commercial airplane with foot retardant.
So
That's how.
yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I wish I knew the gallons of retardant they each held. I don't remember, but you can imagine the large one holds a lot. Very effective tool in certain settings.
Was that DC-10 recently moved? I'm sorry, a friend of my son's was a pilot of that station in Redmond for a long time.
Well, there's one in Redmond as well that I think is Forest Service. So this just shows the state assets. There are Forest Service assets that will be around as well. So aircraft is a big part of our business. Without that aircraft, we wouldn't be as successful. It's very important to what we do. When I talk about adding seats to our complement of resources in Douglas County, one of the reasons for that is the change in the fuel type. With the large fires that we've had in the last 10 years, the fuel type has changed. So there's large fire starts out there with more fine fuels and brush coming in underneath the timber. So seats can be more effective in that setting. So that's one of the reasons that we're using that resource there. As the fuel types change, we try to be nimble, have the best complement of resources to address that fire in that fuel type. So I went over a lot there, but kind of summarize a few things. This fire season's shaping up to be longer. We started a month early, so we'll see how long it goes on the back end. But normally, an average year, we end fire season around the first part of October. Last year, we ended towards the end of October. So we'll see what this year brings to us, but it's looking like it'll be longer than normal. We've increased our detection capacity and the number of cameras out there, which is pretty handy for us. We've significantly upgraded our prevention efforts in our PSA messaging with that grant that we received. And I think that's helping us out quite a bit. I mentioned Senate Bill 762 and the additional resources that brought to us. There's quite a bit there that I didn't summarize, but it did bring some extra boots on the ground in the field, but also additional capacity and support from our Salem and Missouri offices. We talked in detail about the change in the aviation assets. There's 2 additional seats. I think it's going to be a good help for us. I can't emphasize enough the partnerships that we have and how important it is to our complete coordinated system. Patients, county staff, folks that helped us at the camp for that, the park, Sheriff's Office, ODOT helps us, partners at OSFM, Forest Service, local fire protection districts, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but that system is why we are successful. And I think Oregon's considered one of the best wildland firefighting states in the nation, and it's because we have so many people involved and we're so coordinated. So can't emphasize that enough. I mentioned the support from county really helps us and appreciate it. And I mentioned at the start of the slide, there's lots of detail we didn't go over. I'm available to help answer any questions. And if you ever want to follow up on any of this, if you want to visit us out on the site, I'll be happy to host anyone. Excellent.
And when we contact your office directly to do that?
Yes. So I'm available for questions unless you want me to save that towards the end.
Let's see if there are any questions right now. There'll be more at the end, I'm certain. But you did a good job of letting questions be asked as they occur. I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, I used to work for the Forestry Department back in the early 70s.
Did you?
An old camping Halem. It's no longer in service.
Okay.
Tillamook office.
Oh, Tillamook. Okay. I started my career in Tillamook as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
A few years after I was there. In the early 70s.
You have the same friends apparently.
A guy called Carver Trout was the head of the.
Oh yeah, I've heard his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started my career there, not on the fire side, on the forestry side.
I thought it was a great name for
Yeah, right,
the guy that.
yeah. Maybe he would have been an ODF and W out of a really good name there. So did you want to switch seats?
Yep, yeah, that would be great. Brent's gonna. Where's the artist?
If I stand.
All right. Morning again, Commissioner. For the record, Brent Griffiths with the Office of State Fire Marshal. Patients asked me to come in today to just talk to you kind of about how the state is able to support the county in a large incident, what tools we're able to provide, and then what your involvement as county commissioners might be in the event that we get an incident that is outside of incorporated areas or outside of a fire protection district. Before I get into what I'm going to talk about, maybe give Chief Mentor a chance to introduce himself. Chief Mentor, we introduced ourselves as we began, but.
So I'm Chad. I'm the fire chief of Coburg, but also the current fire defense board chief for Lane County, Lane County Fire Chief. I've been doing that for 20 years this year. I've been in this business for like 35. I don't know. Finally jacked up my back, by the way. So I'm having some problems over here, but I'm doing pretty good for 85. I just wish I was for 85. Like this. And so I'm the basically the liaison or contact between OSFM and the local fire districts. Do a lot of work on obviously the major fires, and of course with ODF, which are typical partners. So, which is very smooth, of course, whether it be Western Lane or South Cascade District. I deal mostly with South Cascade, even though my district happens to be mostly technically in Western Lane. So it's a weird split, but other than that.
Ken, I'm sorry for your recent loss of Ray Smith.
Yes, yes.
There.
Yeah, he was my chief for a few years back in the day. So he was a great dude.
We worked with him here for a while.
Yeah, good guy. Thanks.
All right, well, thanks, Chad, for being able to join us. Again, just to kind of talk through where we step in with regard to providing help to the county and local fire departments. Typically, the process of bringing in assistance into the areas highlighted by this graphic. Get an incident, it is first initially responded to by your local fire department, and then any mutual aid partners if needed. As that incident grows, if there are additional mutual aid agreements that that department has with areas maybe outside of their normal mutual aid partners, those folks will be engaged if they're able to come in and provide assistance. And then in the event that that incident then exceeds the capacity of those mutual aid partners, that's where we're able to come in and provide assistance to mitigate that incident. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a second. But beyond the ability for the state to help, we also have interstate mutual aid agreements with other states where they're able to bring in assistance as well to help us. A good example of that was last year on the Cedar Creek fire, when we had that east wind event in early September. That fire pushed toward Oak Ridge. We were able to bring down some resources from Washington. Great partnerships with our surrounding states. In 2020, we had resources come from as far as North Dakota. That all happens through the Office of Emergency Management. But great to know that if we're tapped out here, our partners from outside or from other states are able to assist us. So getting into how the state is able to assist the county for an incident, we have some tools that have been around for a while, but then some new tools. Ola talked about Senate Bill 762 and some of the tools that were made available to them through that legislation. We also received some funding for some additional tools. And that includes pre-positioning of resources, and then also immediate response resources, which are resources that we can send in short of a conflagration. And I'll get into those too. But I think maybe most folks, the tool that we've been able to use for quite a while is the Conflagration Act. Maybe most folks are familiar with that, but it's great. In addition to being able to bring in resources under the Conflagration Act, for us to under 762 be able to pre-position resources or bring in resources short of the Conflagration Act. It's been a great tool that's been made available to us through that legislative action. So just to kind of go through each of those tools. Pre-positioning is the deployment of fire resources in advance of a declared declaration or request for resources. It's really when data suggests that there is a high likelihood that there's going to be an incident that the locals are going to need help, that incident is going to exceed their capacity and their mutual aid capacity. So we're able to bring in resources to pre-position them here in the area to be able to respond to that in the event that they are needed. Again, going back to Cedar Creek as an example, as that forecast developed and we saw that those east winds were going to pick up and potentially impact that Cedar Creek fire, which at the time was sitting 13, 14 miles east of Oak Ridge. The forecast indicated those winds were going to impact or move that fire close to Oak Ridge. So we brought in a task force, which is 5 engines and their crews, and pre-position them here in Eugene in anticipation of needing them, in fact, and deploy them. In addition, we also brought in a second task force from Washington, recognizing that east wind event, while it wasn't forecasted to be quite as significant as what we saw in 2020, still significant. We had the Cedar Creek fire here, but concerned about other incidents that may pop up on the landscape throughout the state. And so we brought in a second task force from Washington as well, and put them up in the Kawartha area to be able to respond to both of those task forces that were pre-positioned, ended up on the Cedar Creek fire based on its advancement on Oak Ridge. So I also want to add as part of that kind of response to that incident is that Lane County had 2 task forces that were deployed at the time to a conflagration up in northeastern Oregon. And so, they obviously concerned about those resources not being available for a local response here. And so Chief Minter reached out to myself and we had a conversation about whether those resources could be deployed. It's certainly something that we want to recognize is that while we've got we will ask resources to go to another part of the state, we certainly recognize that their priority is their home turf first. And so we had that conversation. The decision was made that let's get these resources back into the area. So those resources were able to come off of that fire in northeastern Oregon and be back in the area to be able to respond to that incident. So again, pre-positioning, something that was made available to us under 762, and we have used it quite a few times in the last 2 years. I think last year we pre-positioned resources 4 or 5 times across the state. Again, just based on data, it indicates that there's a lightning bust that's coming through. You've got an existing fire with wind that could hit it and really have some dynamic movement. And so those resources, be able to have those resources, be able to get on that fire quicker with the goal of keeping it small, keeping it out of communities. So, and pre-positioning, it can be requested by the local structural fire departments. So through the Fire Defense Board chief, the PCs has got concerns in that local area. It's also something that we can decide to do at the state level if we kind of see that there's a need for resources to be placed within a region because of again, incoming lightning or something that could result in a large incident. So, and then again, a couple of other examples of what would kind of justify the pre-positioning of resources. So, so moving on to immediate response, and again, immediate response is also new to us and allows us the ability to mobilize resources short of declaring a conflagration. Prior to us being able to utilize or have the ability to do that, we had to first wait for the governor to declare a conflagration before we could deploy resources. And of course, that's a process. It takes some time, and I think on average, boy, it can be, just depending on where that incident is and where we are deploying resources from, it can be up to 12 to 14 hours for us to get resources to that area. Under immediate response, if there's an emerging incident where the locals are dealing with that and need that additional help. They've engaged all their mutual aid partners, but need that additional help. They can request resources from our office, and we will look to surrounding counties and see if we can get resources there to them to be able to help mitigate that incident. Again, hopefully with the goal of or the intent of trying to keep that fire small, out of communities, and keep it from going to a conflagration. And so those are resources that we pay for. Normally under mutual aid agreements, that's reciprocal. I help you, you help me. Because we're bringing in resources, normally from agencies that the local agencies would not be in mutual aid agreements just because of their distance. They wouldn't be in mutual aid agreements with them. So we will deploy those resources, but then also pay for them. Again, funding that was for those resources was through 762, we have seen have been very, very helpful in keeping fire small in that communities and being able to respond more quickly than we were able to under just the normal conflagration process, be able to provide those resources to the locals. Ola talked about the fire around Lowell, the John Lay fire. Was that what that was? Reuben Lay fire, and the coordination between the structural fire departments, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and OSFM. I was on that fire as well. I was in the staging area with the incident commander and recognizing that was an incident that was impacting a lot of structures. We had evacuations going on, and that the county had already made an all-county call for resources to come, and there was the potential that they were going to need additional resources. And so there was a conversation about that, and we had kind of provided kind of a heads up to Salem that they might be getting that call. As it turned out, locals were able to mitigate that incident on their own, and so that was not needed, but we were certainly there prepared to provide those resources. The other type of incident or immediate response that we are able to provide, it's something that Ola talked about as well, is air resources. So we've entered into an agreement with the Oregon Department of Forestry that there is something that is outside of an area that they would not normally fly, that they would not have justification to fly because it's not near lands that they protect. We can work with them to use that aircraft to support the structural fire service in protecting homes, protecting lives. And so, as Ola mentioned, we were able to utilize air resources on that fire on Mount Pisgah or Potato Hill, and really critical for I think for air to be on that fire. It was very difficult to access. And you had some critical infrastructure on the top of that hill, those communication towers. And so we were able to provide that. And again, as with the structural resources, the boots on the ground, that is something that we pay for as well. So that does not fall on the department to ensure those costs. So air resources and cost of, my apologies, forgetting what slides I have here. So, but as far as the request for those resources, those immediate response resources, air resources, and that's a conversation that we have with the Fire Defense Board chief and myself. So, and then lastly, we'll talk quickly about the conflagration. So that conflagration is something that's declared by the governor. That's when that incident, again, as with immediate response, it has exceeded the capacity of the locals to respond. There's a need for them to get back and respond to their own calls, right? We recognize, our fire departments, you get a large incident, but they also have their other calls that they're still getting on a routine basis. And if they've got all the resources on that large incident, obviously, they're lacking the resources to respond to their normal calls. And so in that event, then there's a request that is made to us from that Fire Defense Board chief that says, we're tapped out, we need help. And so we then work with the governor's office, get a declaration of a conflagration. And then that's when we're able to bring in not only boots on the ground, but an incident management team. Which is so we're able to take that incident over completely for that department, so they can go back and respond to their local calls, and we can manage that incident on their behalf. So some of the considerations that are made when it comes to making that decision to declare a conflagration, it's a lot of the same considerations that are made for the use of some of our other resources. But life-threatening situations, threatened structures, evacuations, so on and so forth. So, so when we come in and we bring that incident management team, we will work on behalf of that fire department that has that jurisdiction. So we'll do a delegation of authority with that fire chief or fire chiefs if it's multiple jurisdictions. And again, that's taking on that incident, taking responsibility for that incident and managing it until it gets to the point that it can go back to the locals if they are comfortable with being able to respond or mitigate that incident from that point, that we're able to come in and get it to a point that they're comfortable they can take it back with what they have. So similarly, and this is where it gets where it gets to your involvement as county commissioners, is if that incident is outside of a fire jurisdiction, and that's where we're going to work with you as a board on getting that delegation of authority, because that is those structures that are outside of a fire district fall under the board's responsibility with regard to structure protection. And so we will likely work through patience and on that delegation, but that's where, as with the fire chief, it is you saying to our office, please manage this incident on our behalf. And it's really so that delegation of authority is really a contract for work. Here's our expectations. Here's how we would like you to manage that, and can include things such as if you do media releases. We want to review, or we want to approve those media releases before those go out, or if there are any other incidents that pop up in areas that are outside of a structural fire district, we want you to handle initial attack. Where the fire departments would otherwise have to do that, since we've got resources, we're there. You guys want us to do that, we can do that. So those are all things that would be part of that delegation of authority. So, Chief Mentor?
I just want to clarify one thing. He's talking about Conflagration Act, in, let's say, an unprotected area, which is really underprotected is what we call in the state, but they might declare a Conflagration Act. That is not on your dime, that's free to you, right? Prior to Conflagration Act, if we send up, we're protecting places with task forces and those kind of things, that is financially on you. So that's where the money comes in. Once it's a state declared Conflagration Act, basically you have the state's checkbook. But before that, the task force runs about $16,000 to $20,000 for a 24-hour period. And that's for one task force. We're usually sending 2 or 3 at a time in this kind of instance. So that's what we need to be aware of cost-wise. So,
I have a question on the governor's resource for the declaration of conflict. Are you the main resource for that declaration? When the government does declare conflict?
Are you saying, am I the point of contact?
Your department, the Department of Fire Marshal?
Yes, yeah, we're the ones who facilitate that request, right? That is request, yeah, that is correct. And then what we do is we're also the agency that's responsible for kind of organizing the response. So we have an agency operations center. We activate that agency operations center once there's a request for resources, and then we reach out to counties to see if they've got resources available to be able to send to respond to that incident where that conflagration is requested.
And on that declaration, then the cost shifts to the,
Correct.
to the state.
Correct.
I mean, Mr. Mokrice asked me to mention, use Cedar Creek as an example. So during Cedar Creek, we had City of Oak Ridge was incorporated area, had a fire district, but High Prairie is more of in the unincorporated areas. So the Fire Defense Board Chair, Chief, or the Fire District Chief is aware of those areas, and the mobilization coordinator will come to the county administrator and request the delegation of authority. They're bringing in a team, and they're bringing in other fire resources to support that. Last year was a little bit different in that we didn't declare as a county because the structures were threatened. However, we entered into a conflagration and we had resources pre-positioned. Structures were not lost during that event, but we did get a fire management assistance grant declaration to be able to request reimbursement through that declaration process. So that'll be coming, in that we're recovering all the expenses incurred by all the first responders under those emergency protective measures. So that's just one example of where we're getting into different areas of terrain that we've never really been in before.
And we may touch on this in the course of the conversation, but important for the board to know because the board provides an annual delegation to the county administrator in that event of the Cedar Creek fire. And, I think it was on a Saturday that you contacted me and said, we need to sign some paperwork because we did transfer authority to the fire marshal for that event, correct? Right. So I came down to Delta, signed that. So as opposed to having the board have to schedule an emergency meeting and take action every time we know these events are going to happen, right? So the board provides that annual delegation that allows us then the flexibility to make those decisions in real time, which is really critical to not have to go through that kind of logistical process and coordinate all of your schedules in the middle of summer when people are sort of out and about doing things. So I just wanted to, the fire response folks have all talked about how critical it is for their coordination. It's also really important that as a policy body that you have provided that type of flexibility to allow us to respond to those events in the moment too.
Steve, before you came, we didn't even have an emergency plan for the Board of County Commissioners. It's strangely coincident with you coming here. All of this.
Well, I will say patience has been such a key part when when these folks talk about they pick up the phone and contact patients. And, patience has been absolutely the best resource that we've had in building our emergency response capabilities.
And really 8 years ago, we didn't have any kind of plans in place at all. So what we're seeing today is really a gem compared to what we have.
And I think I don't want to steal the thunder here but this is important for the board to understand just the coordination and the clarity around what the role of the county and the Board of Commissioners is and your staff are in coordinating with all these folks. Because if we're not clear on what our role is, we can't be of support to the folks that are out there fighting these fires, right? So I think we continue to evolve and progress and do a better job each season with this work. My sense is that we're in a really a much stronger position than we were several years ago in terms of our ability to play the role that we need to play as a local agency, as a local governing authority, a county, in supporting the fire response folks that need to do their work.
And I have questions regarding your department's coordination with the sheriff's departments at the county sheriff department, because it was an emergency where the sheriff called me in the middle of the night and asked me to open Alma Ward County for your department.
Sorry, open what?
Alma, which is our former forest ward county. It's what Veterans Legacy is now, in the middle of the night. But it was the sheriff that called me. It wasn't your department, to ask if the crews could be stationed there. I gave authority that I didn't have at the time, which is what I remember most.
That's called asking for forgiveness, not permission.
But but we don't need to go into details right now. But I'm presuming it's a very close coordination with the local sheriff's department and the local thing.
So that was ODS that actually called. They had a
Yellow Point Fire.
camps up there on fire. But I know that patients and ODF, of course, but patients and our RMC, we're always, especially in the summer, we're always talking. But I would give an example of our collective worst day at Holiday Farm. People think of that as like, a fire, post-fire, once the fire started, but patients and other people that day that we talked to, county roads, the sheriff's department, ODF, we had, 2 structural task forces already set up for that weekend to do that wind event. We didn't know it was gonna be as bad as it was. I think we all understand that. We knew the pin was gonna drop somewhere. But we had 2 task forces structurally. We had, road crews ready to shut down roads, power companies ready to shut down, if we had a power line across the road. We had a lot of pre-planning before that event. Unfortunately, it still didn't work out. But no one would have guessed we'd have that kind of fire, of course. But a lot of these things happen without anybody really knowing. And most of the time, nothing really happens. So just like right now, we're really worried about next week. We are in a maybe historical dry level coming into July 4th. I mean, probably the driest we've ever had on record. I don't know exactly where we're at right now. ERCs are probably in the, I don't follow like you do, but probably in the late July's, fuel moistures. We are in a historic, fires get really big July 4th. But hopefully we have nothing. But we'll be prepared and we have those conversations all the time. Thank you.
That's really all I have. I might just add that Ola talked about kind of things that ODF is doing to kind of prepare for fire season. Something that we're doing to work with local fire departments is we provide been able to provide now for the second year a grant for seasonal staffing. So it's up to $35,000 to fire departments that apply that allows them to bring on staff for fire season. So great success with that last year. And I think most, if not all, agencies within Lake County applied and received that again this year. So bringing on additional staff for fire season just to have more resources out there. So with that that's all I have. Appreciate your time. As always, I'm available for the additional questions. And Commissioner Buck, great to see you under these circumstances. You and I usually run into each other on fires. Fortunately, we already have had that situation this year. Hopefully it doesn't happen a whole lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wish I wasn't so well versed in this that you presented, only by the mere fact that I don't want to see fire anywhere on landscape that endangers people and gets out of control. But I want to recognize that we have the best of the best in emergency response coordination here. Mostly because of your fantastic leadership and your entire staff that does incredible work. I've seen that year after year in the fires within the district I represent. And I couldn't be more thankful. Hands down, they save lives every single year. And what you do is incredible. All of you do is incredible on your staff. I hope we don't have that kind of season again. I would love to have a break, as you all would, I'm sure. But I do learn something new every time, including in this presentation, about how you coordinate within your agencies. I'm kind of on the periphery of what you do each year when this happens, and get to see your work. And with patients in this role, we started about the same time here at the county. My learning curve was straight uphill in the beginning regarding this. But I've always felt comfortable with the level of expertise and response. And I don't think anybody in our county should question that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the compliments and just to echo, Lane County is when we have an incident across the state, Lane County is someone that we know we can rely on when it comes to sending resources to other areas. And also an example often of with regards to how they're organized, what they do to organize. An example would be with other counties to model. So I think that organization was highlighted. I mean, it's unfortunate as the Holiday Farm Fire was. I think that without the organization that existed here under the Fire Defense Board Chief's leadership and offers. So just echo those comments. Lane is a very strong partner with us and someone that we look to and we know we can get some good quality.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Any further questions from the board? Excellent. Questions back to you then.
Thank you. So I just would like to call to your attention for the new commissioners, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan is a document that really brings together all the first responding agencies, and we talk about our ability to mitigate wildfires in the future and looking at fuels reduction activities and action items that we can put into place and work together and leverage resources, funding, staffing, and coordinate projects. And Brent referred to some of their grants through 762. One of the biggest grants that was pushed out recently was the Community Risk Reduction Grant, and I believe you've heard about it now through maybe Land Management and the FireWise team. But we secured a $500,000 grant to do fuels reduction activities on the landscape for homeowners that are identified by the community-based organizations such as Senior and Disabled Services in coordination with the fire chiefs for those most vulnerable and unable to reduce the fuels on their properties. And so that work will start most likely next year, but the paperwork is going to start now. And I think Land Management is going to make that announcement here in the next week or two. But that's just one solid step in the right direction of reducing our risk on the landscape for wildfire spread, and then also protecting our homeowners. So I look forward to that project moving forward. And that's just one way that we can catch us in the front in an advanced planning activity. I'm not a firefighter, I'm not a first responder, but I can work on how do we reduce that risk in the future. So I just want to call that out. The other piece here for the partners in the room is that whole community approach we talked about yesterday. I mentioned the mass care exercise at the fairgrounds. We can't do this alone. We have to do it together. And in the initial response, initial attack, these are the people I'm talking to first, and then they go to work and do their thing, and I'm over doing all the other things that they don't do, right? They don't do significant public information and outreach when we're doing evacuation. We work with the sheriff's office, we work with our PIOs, but we coordinate that message with the information they're giving us. Right? So it's a giant wheel that's moving, and in order for us to do that efficiently and effectively, we have to have these relationships on a blue sky day. So I asked our wildfire and structure fire partners to come and present that information to the board so that you can build relationships with the people that I'm working with. And when you meet them in the field in our worst day, you already are familiar with their response, their expertise, and how we do it here in Lane County. So. With that, Chair, I'd say we take a break maybe for 10 minutes and come back around 10:40 if that's okay, and we'll get started.
That'll be perfect. Any questions from the board before we enter into a recess? Patience said, I'd like to point out that that is online on our website in its entirety. And, well done for getting that there. So,
Chair Clark
yes, Diana.
and everyone in the room during the break, just a reminder that even though Metro will mute the mics on their end, you're still on hot mics on the Zoom webinar. So just an FYI.
Thank you so much. Then we will recess until 10:40 by that clock, which is accurate.
So when did you start?
Sheriff Trapp, right before he stepped down.
Right.
So 2019.
Sure, yeah, right. We hired patients in 2019, but the conversation before we hired patients, the conversation that I had with Sheriff Trapp was really an understanding that emergency management lived in the sheriff's office, and it's just not, that's where it's historically been, but it has a different perspective when it's under a sheriff than it does when it's an office of the entire organization. And Sheriff Trapp, to his credit, said, you know, we could do emergency management better, and was willing to have the conversation about moving it out of the sheriff's office and having it really be a county-wide function. So we did that, and I think it was around 2018. Moved it out, created this office of emergency management. We put it in Public Works, and now, you know, understanding that Public Works has the sort of administrative support that was necessary, but we always had a dotted line between the emergency manager and the county administrator, again, recognizing that this really needs to be a county-wide function, not a departmental-led function, because of all the things that you've seen here, the coordination, the relationship. So number one was moving it out of a department and having it be really a standalone function with an organization-wide and a community-wide focus. Number two was hiring patients and bringing in someone that has the skill and the ability to do the work, the professional training to do the work, but also the relationships. And I think what we did not know when we hired patients was the level that she would lift our emergency management function to. So I don't need to go into all that because you all know it and you see it in all the ways that you see it, but I just wanted to call that out, that we continue to, and if any commissioners were able to, was it last week or the week before that we had the event, the training event out at Lane Event Center. I mean, we had how many state agencies? I counted at least 4 or 5 state agencies. There was actually the state of Oregon. The Oregon Emergency Management Department was originally going to do a statewide Cascadia planning event, but it was canceled because they weren't prepared to do that. We decided to take that on and do it for our community. Patients did. And so patients coordinated with state agencies, with local, other local partners, City of Eugene, City of Springfield, and others, nonprofit organizations. Green Hill was there, multiple community-based organizations. First time in Lane County history, to anyone's knowledge, that we've ever had an event like that. And again, this gives us the ability not only to plan the tactical and logistical issues, but the relationships, just to get to know the people and the players, build those relationships in good times so that when something bad happens, we're prepared and we know who to contact and how to do that work. So all of that is happening under patients' leadership, and the relationships that she has built and continues to build. So I just want to thank you for calling that out, that it hasn't always been this way. And we continue to do really great work to put ourselves as an organization and our community in the best position to be able to respond to the toughest challenges that come at us. So now I'll turn it over to you.
It's super fun. I come to the county with more experience because I worked for the City of Eugene in the emergency management program. So I had some relationships with the local partners. So I got a little bit of a leg up. When I came to the county, I knew where some of the holes were, but I had no idea how big the county was. My focus was just on city limits. I am a rural resident of Lane County, so I also had an unfair advantage over other candidates for the position. So I knew what we were looking at in rural areas, but I also know that rural residents can survive on their own without some resources. Without water, it's not possible, but other things it is. I just want to call to your attention our third portion of the meeting today. I brought in Brendan and Hannah. They're just going to sit through this portion, listen to me talk at you for a minute, and then I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves and we'll talk about that mitigation plan. So I'm going to breeze through this just in the essence of time. This is an actual FEMA course. It's called the ICS 402, and it's ICS for senior and elected officials, so the incident command system. I think Commissioner Sunny, you asked me about, do we use ICS here? And we actually do quite extensively, and that's what helps me communicate well with my fire partners and law enforcement partners, is we're all speaking that same language. It's a product of 9/11. So one of my intentions here are, it's going to be super repetitive for you, Commissioner Buck, because you've already seen this, done it. However, we do have a few new commissioners that have not seen this. So it's really just giving you an understanding of what our hazards are here in Lane County. So what do we face and how do we rank them based on probability, vulnerability in these specific events. What you see here on the left is our hazard profile in declaration history. So over the course of 30 or 40, 60 years, I think was the number we came up with. So since 1964, the flood of 64, that we've had a significant number of declarations. Just in the last 10 years, since 2012, we've had just over, I think it's 11 disasters, federal disasters here in Lane County. So you can see the uptick over the last 60 years, just down in the last 20. And then the hazards that we rank that we could probably see and be more frequent here in Lane County are windstorms, snowstorms, wildfires are starting to get a little bit higher to the top, but we also have volcanoes. So you'll see there at the bottom, yep, we've got volcanoes. We have a number of hazards here in Lane County. And then it's quite eye-opening to me when I approach people that don't even know they live in earthquake country, that Cascadia is a thing. And so there are still people out there that have no idea that we do have a looming earthquake scenario off the coast of Oregon. So I bring this to your attention so that, one, you know that what we're at risk for, and how we document those in our mitigation plan. And Brendan and Hannah will go into great detail in that area. We talked a lot about this, the whole community approach. Really, our preparedness is dependent on many partners, from our public safety partners to our local government partners. That's all of our incorporated cities, so being connected to them and coordinating our efforts both in mitigation but also in response. That's how we build those relationships for the bad day. Constantly knocking on those folks' doors and working on our preparedness and our resilience as a whole community. And that's what really brings us together. This is just an example of my relationship to many, or the emergency management program's relationship to many. I think some of you have seen this slide, but where we intersect with the state partners, our county partners, and our local partners, so our community-based organizations, there are a significant number of people that want to support us and help plan for emergencies and prepare for our worst day. And I think this has helped us be very successful here in Lane County in knowing everybody that can bring something to support us in both response, but also in recovery. The McKenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group is something that is a grassroots organization comprised of many that have helped us recover in that footprint of the Holiday Farm fire. The NIMS framework, National Incident Management System, is the framework we follow. This is federal guidance. And this is basically how I run my emergency management program. We write a plan, we organize and equip to the plan, then we train the plan and we exercise the plan. So for example, that mass care exercise last Wednesday, what we learned from the Cedar Creek fire was we stood up a temporary evacuation point for the displaced population, and there were areas of improvement. There were some wins and successes, but there were also areas of improvement, and we developed an improvement plan or an after action that identified the areas we could do better, and we capitalized on that. We wrote a plan for how do we stand up a temporary evacuation point, what are the roles and responsibilities of all of those positions at that site. And we tested it in that mass care exercise last Wednesday. So we staffed it, we provided supplies, and then we moved a bunch of people, survivors, through that exercise and tested that plan for its validity, and then we approved it and walked on. So now, if we have to do that again, we have a plan in place that tells us, oh yeah, here's how we do this, here's the supplies, here's the people that can help us. And that's just one example of the NIMS framework and how it shows us a way forward. So you'll hear me say this a lot going forward as a board when I do come to you and I talk about the 5 mission areas. You'll notice here across the top, you can't see it, but prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. Those are the 5 areas we spend our time, and that guides our work. My program is funded by the Emergency Management Performance Grant, and that performance grant comes with its own work plan. And that work plan is basically defined by the federal government and the state of Oregon. So we do have these benchmark items we have to drive to. So for example, keeping our emergency operations plan updated and formally promulgated by the board every 2 years is one example of that benchmark item that we have to do in order to qualify for that funding. And it aligns with these 5 mission areas. And the 32 core capabilities are, how do we meet those mission areas? I apologize, this slide doesn't show up very well, but I'll make sure you get a copy of this. But across the top here, there are 3 core capabilities that cross every section of those mission areas. One of them is planning, and I just mentioned that, right? Our emergency operations plan crosses all 5 of those mission areas because we have a response plan, we have a mitigation plan, we don't yet have a recovery plan, but we will. And then the next one is public information. Public information occurs every time we're doing prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. The role of the PIOs and how do we disseminate information crosses all of those 32 core, or those 5 mission areas, sorry. And then operational coordination, the meeting we just had before this. All of those partners, we work together on mitigation, we work together on response, but we also work together on recovery and preparedness. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what we're driving to and how we get there from here. This is my program's work plan for the next year and what we'll be focusing our time and energy on with my limited staff, Brendan, but then that we're also hiring more positions to help work here. So in the mission area, the evacuation planning exercise, so that TEP is an example, but there's much more to be done in evacuation planning. So drawing evacuation zones in coordination with all of the fire district chiefs to make sure we have those fleshed out and we know where those pinch points are. That can take some significant amount of time. Something you'll be hearing about over the next couple of weeks, we're transitioning to a new alert and warning system. So we've been on this system that we were paying a significant amount of money for with all of our community partners. The state has signed a contract with another vendor and it's free. So it doesn't cost us anything. All the other counties across the state of Oregon transitioned a year ago. We weren't, our dispatch centers and our first responders were kind of like, let's just hold on to what we got because fire season, and nobody wanted to change it. Well, now the time has come where we do need to transition. So we've been working behind the scenes. That transition actually happens on Saturday. We'll be migrating to a new system, and that's called Everbridge. Devin has been doing the public alert warning outreach and education to the general public. So you'll hear more about that. It's not going to be perfect. It won't be seamless as we transition because it is a new tool and it's got so many more bells and whistles than we've ever seen. So I look forward to the transition, but we'll get there. The other one is in December, I'll be coming to the board and asking you for a formal promulgation and adoption of the basic plan of our emergency operations plan. That happens every 2 years. So that just holds us accountable to read that plan, make sure it's updated and it's current and accurate, and bring it to our elected officials to make sure you understand it, you support it, and we can be moving on to other parts of this document that are not public. This document is public, and it's only about 75 pages. The other piece is a National Preparedness Fair. So hopefully in February of this next year, I'll be using some Homeland Security money to host and conduct a preparedness fair for our community, but also for our first responders. So more on that to come. And then also training our staff and our partners is extremely important, that we're not always just responding, but we're also capitalizing on those opportunities to improve from lessons learned in recent events. Brendan's going to be working on the disaster cost recovery plan. So developing what that looks like, that is a strategic plan item that we have put forward. So over the next 6 months, we'll be working on getting that project underway and hopefully have something robust come this December/January. The mitigation plan, I'll let Hannah and Brendan talk to that, and then community wildfire protection plan. I'm hoping to kick off an update to that plan in January of this year. Before my tenure here at the county, that plan didn't really see an update since 2009, I believe. So when I got here, and we updated it in 2020, and the hope and the dream is to update that every 2 years. That's dependent on the data changing. So the fire risk maps and other background data on fire risk to Lane County and across the state of Oregon. So we'll bring more to the board in the future. And then the mass casualty incident exercise. So we did produce a mass casualty incident plan, and that really identifies how do we pull in additional resources such as ambulances. So this morning we talked about fire trucks, but what about ambulances in an MCI event? So we have crafted a plan. We hired a contractor to get that work done. It was fully funded by grants. The next step is to exercise that plan. So that's that protection piece of, do we have an active shooter, an active violent incident, and how do we respond to that with our first responders? So those are just some things that we've been focusing on. So this is the part where I think Commissioner Buck is super well versed, and some of the new commissioners, just giving you an opportunity to understand the difference between an incident command post or the ICS that's happening in the field. So during Holiday Farm Fire, most of the first responders were over at Thurston High School or Thurston Middle School, and that was all the fire suppression activities. We had ODF, USFS, the Sheriff's Office. They were all there, and the USAR team, the Urban Search and Rescue team, looking for the missing, right? Looking for the people that were unaccounted for. That's basically the mission at the incident command post. Get the fire out, find the people, protect the people. At the Emergency Operations Center, we were doing different things. We were doing damage assessment data collection. We were informing elected officials. We were working with the Joint Information Center and coordination of information sharing. So we're capturing all the information from the ICP, and we're also creating information to provide to the displaced population. So we're sheltering all the evacuees. We set up a multi-agency resource coordination center at the fairgrounds, and we're talking to the displaced, our constituents, and getting them connected to resources and support that they need while we've asked them to leave their home, and the unknowns were there. So that's just a few things that we do at an emergency operations center, but just to give you an example of the difference between the two. Any questions on the differences between those? So there's two more here. So the multi-agency coordination group, or the policy group, this is really where policy comes in. So the Board of Commissioners, my order of business is to assign a policy liaison to the Board of Commissioners so that you have one person you can go to and get your questions answered, because we ask you to help us amplify information to the general public, but also be that elected official to inform our partners and our constituents in response mode, but also in recovery mode. And I think that Commissioner Buck has really spent a lot of time in this arena, but COVID was a fine example of this. We're over there trying to figure out all the nuts and the bolts and the boots on the ground vax clinic type stuff, and how are we staffing our emergency operations center. But you have questions. You need to talk about how are we keeping the economy going? How are we informing our other city partners how we're managing the spread? And you conducting and participating in press briefings is important. Well, by assigning you a liaison, a policy liaison, you can get those questions answered quickly. And I think Steve Moker-Heisky, Greg Rickoff, and Judy Williams have all functioned as policy liaisons so that you're getting your questions answered as quickly as humanly possible, and you don't have to wait and you're not trying to find me. The other piece is integrating into the joint information system. So that is a system. Everybody has a message to share. We try not to speak on each other's behalf. We take the message from them and we share their message. So for example, ODF has a message about their fire. We're not going to go talk about their fire. We're going to ask them for their information and amplify that message. And Devin does a really good job coordinating that message with all of the partners' PIOs. If it's eWeb's PIO, if it's ODOT's PIO, if it's the U of O's PIO, they've formed that system to amplify that information and share it across each other's platforms collectively and collaboratively. And that's that JIC, Joint Information Center, or JIS, Joint Information System. Any questions on that one? So again, I talked about this, the ICS, in our EOC, you'll hear me say this a few times too. The incident command system is a product of a presidential directive, PPD 8, and that's because of 9/11. Because of 9/11, first responders were unable to communicate and coordinate and respond together efficiently and effectively without duplicating resources and energy. Because of that, ICS Fire uses already. They've been using this since the 1970s, and our requirement is to use that and adapt that here at the local level for all first responders, including in our emergency operations center. And we receive grant funds, and by receiving those grant funds, we say we will use the ICS framework. It's flexible and adaptable. We can use it to however we need to, but what really helps us be stronger is I understand the language they're speaking in the field, and they understand the language I'm speaking in an emergency operations center, because we all have clear roles and responsibilities, and we can integrate easily. So one example is the Middle Fork fire, the Middle Fork complex fires that we had in Oak Ridge in 2021. We didn't activate an emergency operations center. We didn't need to. But they did have they had a unified command at Oak Ridge High School, and they had the USFS, United States Forest Service, and Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office, the Red Team, and they stood up the incident command post at the school. So rather than stand up our EOC, we just went and got embedded into their ICS structure. So our PIO went and joined their PIO. Our GIS folks, our Geographical Information System staff, they went and got on their planning team, and they were forming maps together with our data and their data and working together collectively on the wheel. I lovingly refer to it as being on the wheel and sharing information, not duplicating. We're also learning in those environments, right? In our EOC, we use what's called an ICS ESF hybrid model. So it's the Incident Command System Emergency Support Function model. So at the top of the organization, you'll see an incident commander, you'll see a logistics chief, an operations chief, a plans chief, and a finance chief. And underneath them are those emergency support functions. And there's 18 emergency support functions, but the ones that you'll see the most are ESF1, which is transportation. So Oren and roads are public works guys, but transportation is much bigger than just our streets. Transportation is air, it's rail, it's bus. ESF2 is communications, and that's radio, landline, TV, and first responder radios. So they go on from there, but it's an easy way for me to ask for a state team to come into my EOC and staff up my EOC, and our staff can speak the same language as them. So that's why I'm a firm supporter of that emergency support function.
I just want to add a little bit to the historical context. Patients mentioned that in the fire discipline, they've been using the structure since the 70s. Really, the ICS model was created in Western wildland fire response. It was 9/11, and the eastern half of the U.S. And I mean, I worked in the middle, grew up and worked in the Midwest. And it wasn't until I moved out west 15 years ago that I really began to understand the complexity and the need for coordination on wildland fires, because you don't deal with it, or we didn't historically in the eastern half. But in 9/11, what they saw was the systems that existed, the radio communications, the processes that existed, and the total breakdown of communication between various public safety response agencies, fire, EMS, law enforcement, all the different responding agencies. They weren't communicating very well. So it exposed this problem of the lack of a uniform way of coordinating for mutual aid and coordination around complex response to emergencies. And so I just want to say that the history in the West is a really good history in terms of, I mean, this is where it's sort of now the national standard is for ICS. And so we're really good at it in the Western half of the US because we've had to be. And then just to say that depending on the incident, it's really about understanding, creating clarity around who's doing what pieces, right? You need to know who is the incident commander, what the role of the incident commander is, who's going to run the communication side of this, who's going to do the logistics. So it's clarity around roles and responsibilities. So ICS is really this sort of like organizational chart that creates really clearly defined roles and responsibilities in the midst of an emergency. Because the last thing you want to have to do is go, who's doing what? Who's doing this? So it really is like when the emergency hits, everyone falls into their role. The incident commander and those who sits in those different seats is going to vary depending on the type of incident. So we've had various people. Van Hurley, our public works director, serves as an incident commander. Chief Deputy Wilkerson has served as an incident commander. Now Sheriff Harold, who was chief deputy, has served as an incident commander. Greg Rick. I mean, we've had the people change in those different roles depending on the incident itself, as well as where we are in the incident. Sometimes you'll have an incident commander that will start in a role, and then as the incident evolves, we realize we need a different skill set. So I just wanted to add some of that context that it's a very well-defined and coordinated structure, and that creates flexibility that we use to adapt to different response needs. And it's really important. I want to just share this brief story. When I was in Nevada, and I'm going to share this one because it was in a different state. We had a commissioner who was like here, who had been elected the chair at the time. We had a wildland fire and an EOC incident command system, an EOC that was set up. And this commissioner was relatively new, had only been in the seat for about a year, was the chair of our board. Felt that it was his duty to lead the event response. And when lights and sirens, happened to have a siren in his vehicle, went lights and sirens 90 miles an hour down to the EOC and walked into the EOC as though it was his role as the chair of the board to run this incident. I use that example because that would never happen here in Lane County and in Oregon. And I've never seen it. We do a phenomenal job, but was a perfect example of a real thing that happened where it is not the role of a policymaker to run the event. It's the role of a policymaker to be ready to provide the support. This is my role to provide the support to patients and to the team of folks. So when everyone understands what their role is and what role they have to play, and they play that role really effectively, then we can do the best job possible of responding to the event. When we don't have clarity about those roles, you have utter chaos.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. It's like I planned that one. But I think Steve will capture this, but this is adaptable for all hazards. It doesn't matter if it's flood, pandemic, a strike, right? We can always use ICS to manage an event and how we respond to an event. It's scalable and adaptable. I'll go into that here in a minute. There's the PBD 8. It's a process, right? So it's effectively project management on steroids using ICS. But it does hold us accountable, and it gives us something to come back to. Most of the people you'll see in an EOC, it's not their day job. You don't function as the logs chief every day, right? This is something you either volunteered or were voluntold to do. Stepping out of your comfort zone of being the front desk person to going to be a logistics chief is challenging. And so we have to be able to give them and afford them time to work through that training and exercise and being ready to respond. So our EOC is really a coordination point. We're not in charge of the incident in the field and how we respond. We are a coordination and support for the incident command post. So, for example, the sheriff had closed down some of the roads on Holiday Farm Fire, and they activated National Guard to staff those control points at each of those sites. We had the National Guard embedded in our EOC, and the National Guard was pulling those logistics and those resources from the state and deploying them to the field at the request of the sheriff. Right? Another example was the sheriff at the ICP was bringing in mutual aid for law enforcement and needed hotels and lodging, care, and feeding of. And that was something he kicked up to the EOC. So we're there for them to say, hey, I need help with this, take that. I need help with this, take that, like shelter, care, and feed. Right? And it reduces the burden on those incident command posts so they can do what they do, especially in initial attack or initial response. Don't normally see an EOC activated in the first 24 hours. If you do, it's, we're running bare bones and we're trying to figure it out. So it's always bumpy the first 24 hours. You'll see more of this in our EOP, but I wanted to show you when we activate an EOC, when, why, and where, and the thresholds of activating the EOC. So a level 4 up here at the top is a minor event. So let's say there's a traffic accident on Highway 56 or 126. Sometimes it's just the dock, right? Say it's just county roads. And so county roads and public works is responding to that car accident, and that's it. So it's a minor activation of the EOC. Sometimes that includes me, depending on what it is, but it's just me. Oh, there's been a bad accident. There's 15 people, 5 of them are casualties. Hey, Steve, you should probably know about this. Should probably let the board know this is probably a thing. And that's how stuff like that unfolds. The Mapleton water crisis is one of those examples where you might hear about it and I'm the only one managing it. And I'm trying to help support them. For example, the school district might not have been able to reopen after the long holiday, but if we got them some toilets, they could reopen, and helping them get access to clean drinking water during that outage. That was one way that I was supporting that community in that minor partial routine.
Patients, just out of curiosity, we've had 2 cities in recent months that have been without electricity. It was not a city, but completely without electricity. Is that something that elevated to emergency?
No, some cities have very robust emergency management programs. Cottage Grove is one of them, and that's probably because the previous commissioner, Faye Stewart, is down there.
Yeah.
So he's very rarely called me for assistance. But the city of Oak Ridge has called and said, we need help with X, or city of Veneta, and they're starting to get better at it. The more events we see, the more tooled and prepared they are at these local levels in these incorporated cities.
So a locality like Mapleton, which isn't a city, doesn't have a city council. When they were without electricity, did you hear about that?
I did not hear about electricity. Without water, yes.
Yes. And that's
those of us in the rural areas, we can live without electricity. We can't live without water.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then down here, when you see catastrophic level 1, this is the EOC is fully activated. All stakeholders policy is on deck, and that's like the Holiday Farm Fire. That's COVID. So this just kind of gives you an idea of when, why, and where we're opening up the Emergency Operations Center. We're running short on time, but just quickly, I think you know that my role as an Emergency Operations Center manager, or somebody's role. So sometimes we staff up an incident commander in our EOC, and then we have an emergency manager, and that's myself, just maintaining countywide situational awareness. Commissioner Buck has been here in these meetings. She's come and sat in on coordination calls or cooperators calls, but she's also sat in on some of my statewide calls where I'm telling the state, here's what we know, here's what we're seeing, here's what we need from you, and we walk on, right? But we also turn around and we do that to all of our county partners within the county. We ask them, what are your significant events? What are your unmet needs? Do you need anything from us at the county level? And we turn around and report that to the state. We obtain and coordinate limited resources, coordinate communications. We have contingency plans and look for what's the PACE model, right? Primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency. How do we form that 24, 48, 72 hours? What are we looking ahead for? What could happen next? And preparing for that. And we do that in the Emergency Operations Center. Coordinating that communications and public information. Holiday Farm Fire, we set up a call center. Pandemic, we stood up a call center. So we're collecting information and we're disseminating information as quickly as humanly possible. And facilitating the recovery process is also the role of the EOC manager. And we did transition into a ROC, Recovery Operations Center, for a while for Holiday Farm Fire, because it's not over. The fire may be out, but there's still much to be done for the county to support the displaced population. Again, EOCs are there to provide support and coordination to those in the field, collecting information, analyzing information. That was something we did in the mass care exercise, where that displaced population, such as evacuated Oak Ridge, most vulnerable, most elderly, but a demographic that we don't see in the major metropolitan area as so prolific, right? And so how do we support them? How do we identify them and capture that information and analyze that and work with all of our community partners and our community-based organizations to ensure we're connecting them with the most resources in a clear and efficient way, and identifying those policy level decisions, if any, to move forward. So again, all the information happens out in the field. Incident commander, there's a liaison. So every incident command post assigns a liaison. Commissioner Buck knows this, and that liaison is like your go-to person. So in the fire world, they always give me their liaison, and I work with that person for whatever I need access to, and they coordinate with the incident commander. And that's basically what we do here in our EOC. We assign a policy liaison to you, so you can ask them any questions you need, get any access to resources that you need from us. And that just folds all the way into the unified command, and they request information and request resources, and we provide it. So it goes in and it goes out, much like a dispatch center. So when they call 911 or they call dispatch, police, I need another officer, I need another fire truck, it's the same thing, right? And these are the ways that we provide those resources. So getting into our EOP, I brought this version. This is the 2021 version. We'll be updating that this year. And these are the things that are going to be covered in here. I won't go into great detail again because of time, but the county council couldn't be here today. So we were going to spend some time walking through this with you, but we'll schedule another time to come back and bring the EOP to the board just to show you what's included in there. But the most important pieces are talking about emergency declarations, employee policies, our mutual aid agreements and what exists, why, when, and where, and who has access to them. I think mutual aid agreements are imperative for us to be able to respond here locally. So building those local mutual aid agreements are extremely important. There's pretty robust statewide mutual aid agreements, the ORCA agreement, and then you heard Brent talk about the interstate agreements. EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact, is a state-to-state contract that exists. Continuity of operations and disaster assistance are other things that are covered in this EOP. So your role, and Commissioner Buck knows this, she probably heard me say this a few hundred times, but all disasters start and end locally, right? We're the first in, we're the last to leave. We're the ones that really respond, and we have to depend on the resources we have here because the state manages them and the federal government supports them, right? They're not going to come in with the big red truck and help us from FEMA, right? We have to be able to plan for and prepare for our worst day, leveraging our resources here locally first, and then pulling in those most closer in that inner circle, which you saw from the fire marshal's presentation, and then going out from there. Building those relationships here locally will help us be the most effective. Having trust and support from my board and my county administrator helps me be stronger in the community and building those relationships and knowing where our pinch points are. So you can't please everybody. Sometimes there's going to be some challenges in navigating our path to a blue sky day. And Commissioner Buck and I have spent some time in some pretty hard conversations trying to figure out how are we going to get there from here. And that's built on trust and support from the board. So you as a board commissioner, we couldn't get any better, any stronger by having those relationships. And I've already sat down with Commissioner Level, and I just have Commissioner Seneca to sit down with and just build that relationship and that understanding with me as the emergency manager, and be completely transparent, open, and honest with what I see and where we're going as an organization. Helping from the balcony and staying out of the weeds is also important. You don't see me generally ever at an ICP, but few and far between. I'm always at the EOC or somewhere in between, trying to support you or our organization to help them in the field. So most of the time you won't see me there. Coordinating the information, we lean on you a lot to be the talking head. We lean on the sheriff a lot to stand in front of our constituents and amplify the messaging that we need. COVID was a fine example of press briefing, and pushing information to the public. And most of the time I prefer that's not me, but sometimes I end up being the person pushing information to the best of my ability. Using that joint information system is important. This is a really useful slide. Devin is going to be hopefully in September a master public information officer, certified or credentialed, one of 127 in the country. So she definitely understands this whole process, and she brings great weight and experience and skills to our program. So managing public information can make or break us, right? Making sure we're coordinating all of that information. We have to share information that is timely, unified, and we can dispel rumors. Pointing the general public to our website as that trusted source Don't go to Facebook, don't go to your social media or your neighbor, right? Go to Lane County Government Yellow Banner, look there, because that is the trusted, valid information that's being shared. And your help by sharing that information is significant, especially in your specific areas. Again, let's see what I got here. Serve as the liaison to your public and your community organizations is important. And that liaison, I already covered that part. I do believe you've received some of my situation reports. So when we do get into something that might start to look like an event, I share situation reports where I've collected information or gleaned information from our community partners, and I push that up to department directors. And sometimes if it's elevated high enough, it comes to the county commissioners of here's what's happening and here's where we're going. I think Mapleton water crisis might be one of the things that you and I worked on, but Commissioner Lovell, you have not been graced with my presence just yet. You're welcome. I'm going as fast as I can. I think I'm almost done. So I do want to call to your attention. I made these little books for you. These are for you to take and put in your office. I do believe the Erin County Council and I will review these with you. But inside here are some FEMA guidance on the role of local elected and appointed officials. So Steve, I might make some of these for the department directors as well, so that you have them in your fingertips. But then the next one is emergency checklist. So what do you do before a disaster and during a disaster and after a disaster? Becoming familiar with the EOP, becoming familiar with your emergency management staff, but there's also parts of in here that include being prepared at home, being prepared at work, being prepared to come to work. We learned the hard way about what it looks like to be virtual in COVID. How do we declare virtually? And yeah, it was quite an adventure. There's also the declaration tab is our part of our emergency operations plan. We have operational annexes in our EOP. They are not public documents. They're not a part of the basic plan, because the basic plan I asked the board to formally promulgate, and I can't make any changes to that but every 2 years. So there are other parts of the EOP operational annexes I can make changes to whenever we have an event, and I can say, oh, that didn't work right, let's fix this and fix that. It's basically our sheet of music. So one of the things when we declare, I'm constantly going and pulling lane code or lane manual to figure out, well, we have to do this, this, and this, and we have to pull these people. Well, instead of going and finding it all everywhere, we made a document, the disaster declaration process, and I've included that in here for your review. But it looks at chapter 20, lane code chapter 20, and lane manual 54. And then there's an example disaster declaration in the back there that Commissioner Buck signed when she was chair for COVID, just to give you an idea on what that looks like. And then the last tab is the state elected official guidelines that's provided by OEM. That goes into great detail about public assistance, when we declare, and the Stafford Act affords us the opportunity to receive reimbursement under public assistance from FEMA or individual assistance. It goes into great detail as to when, why, and where do we get those dollars. So we'll review that in more detail at another time. On this slide, I want to call to your attention, it's hard to see because of the box up there. Let's see if I can move this guy. This is my my text messages from the National Weather Service. So the National Weather Service, for emergency managers, they have alert and warnings that they push out messages to us if there's a impending event that we need to be aware of. And at the top here, you'll notice it's August 9th, 2022. I get a flash flood warning on August 9th of 2022, right? So I'm like, what's this? And then a few minutes later, I get a strong thunderstorm. And then a few minutes later after that, I get a red flag warning. Same day, in like 10 minutes, I get flash flood, lightning, and wildfire. And I'm like, what's happening here? But that actually was in fact happening because the lightning had brought a strong thunderstorm, and flash flood warnings on the burn scar areas could bring a lot of water off of the mountainsides, especially in the Holiday Farm Fire burn scar area. So yes, you're thinking, oh, this could happen. Large wildfire, flood. I just wanted to call that to your attention. So during a disaster, this is all covered in this handout. I'm gonna move a little bit faster because it is 11:30 and I promised 11:10 for my partners. Aaron's not here, so we'll skip through Aaron's slides, but much of this is covered in this book I brought you and we'll reschedule. But ORS 401, this has come up in other counties recently as to why do we have an emergency management program? Why do we have an emergency manager? And I want to make sure it's very clear to the board, because of ORS 401, counties are required to appoint an emergency manager. Some counties make it their IT director. Some counties make it their sheriff. Some counties, the emergency manager is a position within the sheriff. Right now, across the state of Oregon, it's a 50-50 split. 50% emergency managers are reporting to boards or county administrators, and the other 50% are either reporting to the sheriff or a public works director or somewhere else in there. So just to call that out for you, counties are required, cities may. So we have to do this and have these programs. And we'll go into more detail about that. So we covered a bunch of this already. OA3, lines of secession is also covered in code, but also covered in your manual, and then chapter 20. And we covered delegation of authority pretty quickly. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah and Brendan. And Hannah, I think you're going first. So I'll have you come sit here and we will use this computer to present, and this is the clicker, and then I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Is that okay? Is that all right, Chair Farr?
Sure.
Chair, if I could, while we're shuffling chairs, just make a comment or observation.
This is Commissioner Trigger, for those of you all who haven't met her.
Thank you. I just wanted to appreciate the presentation so far and patience, and just note during Cedar Creek evacuation, Commissioner Buck and I toured at Lane Event Center, and I mean, it's not funny, but I joked, you know, hers is the district that catches fire and mine is the district that shelters folks. But it's really, I hope nobody gets a chance to see what that looks like, but we probably will. It's so impressive, but it's also important because it helps to daylight issues that folks, particularly in those really remote rural communities, are facing that is not necessarily directly related to the disaster of the moment. And particularly in that case, there were some really high medical needs, medically fragile folks that don't leave their homes very often. And we would never have seen them, and having our staff on hand from public health and other healthcare providers there to help them connect to services or equipment that they might need was only made possible because they were forced out of their homes by those unfortunate circumstances and in a coordinated shelter and evacuation space. So there's impacts well beyond the immediacy of getting people safe in the moment of a disaster. And I just want to appreciate everyone for all that they did for those folks from the little bit even that I observed in the hour or two I spent there.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger. Please.
You remind me, we have until we're gonna try and keep this as high level as I can and leave as much time as possible for questions. This is a 480-page document.
The last
or
one was
380, sorry. Yes. So it's only getting better, but thank you for your time today. No, it's been a long morning. And I'll introduce myself. My name is Hannah Schaefer. I've been with the county for 10 months now. I started in September. I am also an AmeriCorps member with RARE. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a program through the University of Oregon and AmeriCorps. So Wayne County, University of Oregon, AmeriCorps, kind of 3 supervisors there. But it's been great being with the county for the last 10 months. And my main and only project was to update this NHMP. So I'll let Brendan introduce himself.
So good morning, commissioners. My name is Brendan J. Rosfeld. I'm the Hazard Mitigation and Recovery Analyst for Lane County Emergency Management. I'm a month behind Hannah. I was hired in October 2022 as part of Patience's burgeoning program. And Hannah and I, this has been our main project. I've had a few projects sort of in wildfire evacuation, and Patience has mentioned some of the work that I'll be handling in the second half of this year and going into 2024, but this has been the main focus.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger. Please.
So good morning, commissioners. My name is Brendan J. Rosfeld. I'm the Hazard Mitigation and Recovery Analyst for Lane County Emergency Management. I'm a month behind Hannah. I was hired in October 2022 as part of Patience's burgeoning program. And Hannah and I, this has been our main project. I've had a few projects sort of in wildfire evacuation, and
So we just wanted to have this session to introduce you to the plan and answer any questions you might have about it. And so we also wanted to have you understand the benefit of a multi-jurisdictional plan. We added, I think, 4 new partners to the plan this year, and kind of go over the new risks. I know patients already touched on some of them, so we might not spend too much time there. And also our project goals for this year, the planning process and the timeline going forward, and also identify some of the related countywide plans that we hope to work with in the future. And so, like I said, we added 4 new sub-plan holders. And so all of these partners have their own annex to our plan. And so this is a good thing because they are able to apply for their own FEMA funding. They don't have to go through the county. And so it's time saving for all parties involved, and they're eligible for more projects. And so we added the City of Lowell, and then 4 utilities, Lane Electric, Bletchley Lane, Emerald Peoples Utility District, and Consumers Power. And so we hope, you know, as the next 5 years, I guess, the next update to add even more partners. And in addition to that, we had a lot of contributing stakeholders. There are many special districts and utility partners that don't have their own annex to this plan, but they were heavily involved in the process. I'll just shout out Alrapa. We got a lot of valuable information from them, and same with BLM and Dogami, Department of Geology. So yeah, I won't go through all of those, but it was a good process. I think historically, we do these updates every 5 years, and for my understanding, and none of us were here the last time this was updated, but it seemed to be pretty internal, and so we really wanted to reach out and try to expand and collaborate more with all of these partners. So mitigation planning goals for this, I won't go over all of these, but the biggest one is, of course, preventing the loss of life. I think there's always a really high prioritization of preparedness and response and recovery, and mitigation seems to be left out. But mitigation has the opportunity to really change the outcome of an event. And so a building can collapse or it can stay up. So you have the ability to prevent the loss of life there. In addition to that, minimize and prevent damage to valuable infrastructure and buildings. And of course, with that, you're also going to save a lot of money, which I'll talk on later. We had still recovering from Holiday Farm fire, and that will be for years to come. There's so much recovery for that. So hopefully with mitigation, you know, for example, fuels reduction, it's not going to be as significant. And so the recovery period is going to be less. There's going to be less people displaced. And then just kind of going through these. I think the biggest thing that we also wanted to touch on with this plan update was the public awareness. I think the last time this was updated was in 2018. And since then it's like a whole new world in Lane County. We've never experienced this significant wildfires before, or any of these natural hazards, extreme heat, smoke, wildfire. And so people are really concerned, and we want to make sure that they understand their risks and their vulnerabilities, and that they know the county cares and are trying to do as much as we can to.
When we adopted that plan until 2018, everything was hypothetical.
Right.
Now it's actual.
Yeah. And so the most important part of the plan is that we have identified mitigation projects or action items. And we really try to focus on, I'm going to go to numbers 3 and 4. I think the biggest thing is to do studies and analysis of what needs updated in the first place and mitigated. So looking at our critical facilities and our essential systems, and trying to figure out, or the Lane County Public Service Building, doing assessments and studies of all of those to see what we need to fix in the first place or mitigate. And yeah, number 1 and 2, we are really trying to focus first on critical facilities and essential systems. And then 4 and 5 are kind of touching on, like I touched on before, collaboration with regional partners. Like I said, historically, this has been pretty internal, so we're really trying to expand. And the biggest setback to mitigation is money. So funding is the main issue to actually completing these. So when you are able to work with regional partners who are sub-plan holders or not, you're able to really look at all of your assets and see how can we accomplish these projects together, because everyone wants to mitigate, everyone wants to work on these issues. So trying to do that together. And diving more into this project cycle specifically, I wanted to include pictures as much as possible. These are all taken from Lane County, unfortunately. So I've been using the word mitigation a lot. So at this point, I hope you know what that is. But like I said, I think there's some misunderstanding between mitigation and preparedness. And mitigation is just any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk. And so like I said earlier, you're changing the outcome of an event. In comparison, preparedness, that event happened, what do you have to survive in the meantime? And that's done through policy changes, education, projects identified in the plan, and public outreach. And I wanted to include this graphic on here. It might be hard to read, but I mentioned earlier how it's a cost-saving measure when you focus and put money into mitigation. Every $1 spent from federal mitigation grants results in $6 to $7 savings in recovery costs. So I don't know how much you've spent on Cedar Creek recovery, on Holiday Farm fire recovery. I assume it's millions, and hopefully when we put prioritization into mitigation, we're able to see in the long run. I'm not going to go over these. It's already touched on them, but one of the things that I wanted to focus on that I've seen expand a lot for this project cycle in the past 10 months was the creation of new community partnerships and just how valuable that is. To one, expand our research, our information, what we have included in the plan, and to actually being able to tackle these projects. We might get funding from multiple sources, but it might not be able to cover a whole project. So being able to work together and put all of our money together and tackle a shared project goal is one of the highlights of this plan.
Would you say that some of the barriers for the mitigation plan, every disaster, every presidential disaster results in sometimes hazard mitigation dollars that are released through the Stafford Act, and the dollar amount generally changes depending on the impacts of the disaster. So one of the challenges is there's always a 25% match requirement for us to access those grant dollars. That has, since things are starting to change, to make that much more attainable for us over the last 5 years. Because of the Holiday Farm fire, the presidential declaration went from 75% federal share, local, 25% local match. It went to 100% federally funded, and then the state set aside $20 million to go towards the 20% match or something for some of the partners that were potentially needed. That freed up those dollars for other projects that were not covered under the 100% match, because if you recall, we had that ice storm in Northern Oregon. Other jurisdictions were also eligible to apply for those dollars. And then COVID also released some more mitigation dollars when the state just set aside and approved through the legislature those 25% match dollars for us to take advantage of. So we're starting to make change because they're starting to see that there is immense value in getting these projects underway and implemented. And we identify them in these plans, but then we set it on the shelf historically until the 2018 plan. We set it up there and there's really no money to put behind it. There's no resources and support. So it's just a check the box. Well, now we're going to be able to start making these things happen. And I think Brendan has a slide that shows some of the projects that we're making happen.
Yeah, and I know Patience already touched on some of our biggest hazards. I wanted to point out extreme weather. That's a new hazard that we added to this plan. And one of the big elements of that is extreme heat. We didn't want to make extreme heat its own hazard just because of there's not a lot of funding opportunities right now. That's a very new hazard threat to the state of Oregon. And I think there's been, I know just in Portland, I think there were 12 heat-related deaths just last year in a 1 month period. So we really wanted to focus on that. And there's other elements in the extreme weather, but extreme heat was the big one. And in wildfire, we wanted to really highlights smoke as a cascading event. Smoke is difficult because obviously the only thing, smoke is coming from wildfire, so you have to address wildfire. So we're, trying to figure out how exactly we can mitigate for that. It might be more from a preparedness standpoint.
I'll just mention on the smoke thing, the state is also catching up to understanding what exactly can we mitigate with smoke. Is it air purifiers in homes? Is it these clean air shelters? And I believe in Lane County, Oak Ridge is the only area that's designated by the state as a sensitive air quality issue. But we're starting to notice the problem expand to other areas of the county. And in the plan, you can see in the profile, the amount of days that we've had poor air quality attributed to wildfire has significantly increased in the last decade. So we're getting more smoke and we're getting more of it because of wildfires, which means it's going to burn longer and stay stagnant in the area because we're in that Willamette Valley part where the air just kind of sits if we don't have a wind. So it can stagnate very much like Holiday Farm Fire. When I arrived, it sat there for 2 weeks before we got anything to clear out. And it was about a 5 AQI for those 2 weeks, which is very dangerous for a healthy person.
Right.
So
and smoke is challenging too because the wildfire might not even be in Lane County. Right. So it's kind of a hard hazard to tackle, but like Brendan said, the state's kind of catching up, and hopefully within the next 5 years or so, we'll be able to have more research and mitigation funding for smoke specifically. And I just wanted to include more pictures here. These are from the Holiday Farm Fire and get kind of more into the project overview on that slide. Patience, do you want to talk about some of our already awarded?
Sure, I'll touch quickly. So when it says awarded and funded, that means we actually are starting to receive dollars from the federal government and the state of Oregon. So Holiday Farm Fire culvert replacement. So they're working on upgrading all the culverts in the impacted area, and that's all being funded under that. Because we have this plan, we're eligible to apply for and execute these projects. The other one is Round River Bridges for seismic retrofit under 4562, 100% on the dollar amounts up there, but pre-award and post-award costs are also eligible under these grants. So the next slide, these ones are ones we've actively applied for. So we're changing the culture of the organization that it is beneficial for us to apply for these dollars. Historically, it wasn't because we didn't have the 25% match. It was super hard to navigate the FEMA process. Well, it's getting easier and easier. All of these are things we submitted. Upgrading the Good Pasture Bridge is one of them. I'm doing a public education and outreach one. We're upgrading McKinsey schools. We're continuing to still see that, but storm hardening community schools so that they are better prepared to support their community is one of them. And these are all we applied for these almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago now. So we're still waiting. So that's all. The other side of the coin is we're still waiting for FEMA to get these dollars into the hands of locals so we can execute these projects. So they don't say awarded, they just say pre-award, that we're still waiting through paperwork and answering questions of them before we can start executing these projects.
And then just a brief overview of the project timeline. We kicked everything off in October when Brendan and I came on, and we made sure that everything was moving, all the partners were on the same page, and we started out with the risk assessment. And I'll have Brendan speak on this later on, but we had various regional meetings. So for this plan, and this is new for this plan, we split up in regions. So we had the coast, the valley, and the Cascades. Lane County is one of the biggest counties in Oregon. I'm not sure what it ranks, but and it's difficult because the coast has tsunamis, but the Cascade doesn't. And so there's a really wide variation in hazards there, and it's really hard to address, which is why our plan is so large compared to some other counties. And so we split those up in regional meetings so that we could really hone in on their specific hazards. And those meetings held various stakeholders and participants. And one thing that we did want to highlight was the planned maintenance phase. And so we're trying to still kind of figure out, and I think we have a meeting tomorrow about what the next 5 years are going to look like. Because I think historically these plans have been written and then they just sit on a shelf for 4 years. And so I think we're really trying to make sure that the projects get implemented, that there's expectation for the steering committee. And so that's something new in this plan compared to previous versions. And throughout this planning process, we also had trying to increase our public engagement. Like I said, public citizens are becoming more and more aware of the risks and probably fearful. And so we just want to make sure that they're being included as much as possible. It's definitely been a challenge with this plan. No one wants to read 380 pages. And so trying to figure out ways to make it more accessible. We're working on a story map website to try to make things more interactive as possible. And I will touch on, I did a public survey, and just really quickly, we have all the materials sent over to the state now for OEM, so they're reviewing it, and we'll be sure to incorporate any feedback that they give us before we submit all materials to FEMA. And then once we get everything back from FEMA, we'll be able to formally adopt. And this plan expires October 14th, so hopefully we'll have this adopted before it expires, and then from there on we'll be able to implement all of our projects. And so we had a public survey a couple months back. We really wanted to hone in on the more rural communities, and so we had postcards sent out to 4,500 addresses, focusing more on the coast and the Cascade regions. We wanted to have postcards so that people would have the option for a paper copy due to internet access issues, and we received about 380 responses. It was also shared countywide on social media and different news outlets, and Patience was featured in a video that was advertised on YouTube that she willingly, maybe not willingly, was in. So trying to put this in the face of the public as much as we can.
And Hannah, I'm going to do a time check. It's about 10 minutes till 12, and I have a firm commitment at 12.
So yeah, just quickly, we basically organize these regional workshops around a process called exploratory scenario planning that's been used for land use and transportation, but not really as much hazard mitigation. And it allowed us to basically present multiple potential outcomes or futures around a hazard event to get people thinking, if we're dealing with a Cascadia, a wildfire, an atmospheric river that causes a 100-year flood, what kind of impacts are we going to see? Are there similar effects that are going to happen on these three different types of events? How would we mitigate them? Loss of power, access to fuel, communications, so that you can identify, is there a strategy that could cover three potential outcomes? And then as Hannah mentioned, breaking up the county into those three ecoregions, we wanted to make sure we could elevate the priorities of the coast, saying this is what we're most concerned about without conflicting with what the Cascades or the Valley might be telling us. That way we bring everybody's concerns and then we kind of bring it back to the center. And also to identify where is Lane County best positioned to act and where are city partners best positioned to act, so that we're not duplicating efforts, kind of that same ICS structure. I'm gonna go to the next slide. This is a picture of us in Lowell at the Rural Fire Protection District. And in addition to identifying those priorities, I'd say the other great benefit of these workshops is people getting in the same room together. We heard multiple comments from people that attended saying, we haven't really sat in this room as the city, the police and fire, as public works, and talked about what has happened, what we're concerned about, what we can do, and what we know we don't have capability to do. We wanted that elevated so that we could give an accurate capability assessment and say, this is where Lane County can leverage the resources we have. This is where we need to improve and how we can improve. And this is where we're kind of overwhelmed. And we need to start thinking about, is that mutual aid, or is that something to elevate maybe to a more multi-county regional level and coordinate and bring it back to the state in that fashion. So just kind of a quick aside, a part of our planning process and how we incorporated not just the plan participants, but stakeholders from each of these communities that really can speak to the more rural residents and not just the city limits. I can take this. So as Hannah said, it's with the state for review. They'll offer any revisions they think that we need to make before it's elevated for federal review at FEMA. Also, this would be an opportunity for the board to submit feedback, questions, or possibly requested revisions. This would be the time to do that. And that process is going to take about 2 to 3 months. We would expect to hear back from the federal government probably about mid to late September, based on how much they're allowed to review the plan. And then we're going to be bringing it to the board for formal promulgation in October. As Hannah mentioned, it expires mid-month. And so that process is kind of unfolding at the time, and that's where we're going to be headed before adoption. And then after that October meeting, it's time to kind of start executing. We'll have the BRIC which is one of the main FEMA mitigation programs, opening in August. So we'll be talking about that with our state partners and preparing applications as this plan is going through the review. It's very fast and furious on kind of this timeline. So you can see, yeah, and I just want to, if you can go to the approval process, just a quick clarification for the board. This is a non-regulatory document. There's basically two ways you can approve it. You can make it, bring it to your board or city council for adoption, and then send it to the state and the feds for approval. Or you can send it to the state and federal government and then bring it to your governing body. We're doing the latter because we basically want the feds to say, this is all good as far as we're concerned. Your board just has to adopt it. So you don't have any concerns of, if we adopt this, are we going to still be approved by the process and have to go through this again? So it's making sure that we check all the boxes for the law as we're required for the mitigation plan. And they just came out with new policy that went into effect in April. So this plan is written to new federal guidance that's been updated. And I can certainly answer questions in the future for the interest of time about what kind of policy changes occurred.
I guess 5 minutes for questions then.
So very briefly, I'm looking online and there's a draft, a 129-page draft that's online. So that's something we look at. You're asking for a potential input from the Board of Commissioners. Is that a good place to begin if we want to research what we may want to do?
Yes. Yeah, so we'll double check with Devin if we have the latest version posted online. There might have been some changes during the public comment period as we're revising or preparing it for the state, but that's where I would start.
And then I'd also say, Chair Farr, we printed one version for the board and we'll put on the coffee table for you with a letter that kind of shows the most important parts where what we need to take a look at, because it is big and it's very dense, but we also yellow tag important portions like the action items and the projects we identified. There's only 30, I believe there's only 30-ish by hazard. So there's 2 or 3 for seismic, 2 or 3 for flooding, and they're specific. Well, let's replace Round River Bridge for seismic. So a letter on the front with Brendan's email and additional.
And that looks like it's more than 135 pages. So that's updated from this, right?
Yeah, yeah. And they put a bunch of tabs in there that are not necessary. So fix that with the original.
Thank you. You had mentioned at the very end something that I've been interested in for quite some time, which is BRIC funding. And for those not familiar, this is a federal funding mechanism that comes with a lot of funding for projects. And we haven't traditionally been in a position where we've been able to apply and felt like we would be successful. Are we at a point where you think we now could be successful in applications for funding coming from locally?
So just to be sure that you're aware, Lane County did receive one of the first nationally awarded BRIC applications for the first round of 2020.
Oh, excellent.
It was awarded to Blatchley Lane Utility.
Oh, okay.
And it was a pass-through from Lane County to Blatchley Lane because Blatchley Lane was not eligible to apply. So we helped them apply. So we are doing it. And I think there were a number of applications put forward for Mapleton Water District already. So
I would also say that was part of the regional approach, is because especially for our unincorporated areas, the best benefit cost ratio that FEMA requires us to do, the math usually doesn't work out because of how small the populations are. So by expanding the region and trying to put our mitigation action items in a regional context and showing those cascading failures that could happen, saying let's get Maplewood, Swiss Home, Deadwood, let's get them together in this coast region so that works out, so those funds are coming.
So could you send us a link to that and then maybe in the email add the yellow tabs or specific sections you'd like already put on just to.
Absolutely.
some people like hard copies, some people don't.
And a hybrid is a good. Excellent. Well, what an amazing presentation. We could have given you all another 2 hours.
You could write a dissertation on this topic.
I think you did.
Yeah. 9 months, yes.
Well, wonderfully done.
Yeah.
Well, and I apologize that we have a hard deadline at noon today, but thanks for the presentation. We'll be in touch. And Commissioners and Commissioner Trigger, is there anything you need to add before we adjourn?
No, thank you for asking, Chair.
Very good. At this point then, patients, anything else that we need to consider?
Thank you very much.
Well, amazing. Next time, let's do 6 hours instead of 3 hours.
Yes. Thank you very much.
At this point, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
We need to like phase two.
Yeah.
I thought 3 hours was fine.